Hey guys. Here is part 6 of What If Naruto Went Back in Time from an Alternate Future. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 27, Fox in the Rain. Naruto. A vicious growl bubbled out from Naruto's sore throat as the only answer. Naruto, listen. Shut up. He spat into his empty room. He had finally retreated after Kakashi's outburst on the street, but he couldn't get rid of the booming voice inside his mind as Kurama continued to call for him. Eventually, he gave up, and when he next opened his azure pools, he was face to face with the beast itself. His crimson eyes warily observed the tense boy in front of him who refused to meet with his gaze. Naruto, listen to me. An odd sound rushed out from Naruto's throat in response. It was something between a snort, a pained sob, and a sarcastic laugh. He still locked his gaze on the soft grass in front of him, but soon, he slowly raised his head, and the ancient old Bijou couldn't restrain a flinch. His jailer's every emotion was unmercifully shoved at him at once when their piercing pools met. They were there, bare and naked. The sorrow, the disappointment, the betrayal, and finally, the doubt and distrust. The last time I listened to you, an innocent girl died because of my decision. Naruto spat out the words like they were the acid that had been burning his throat until then. What? Kurama's eyes suddenly widened as he comprehended Naruto's words. You think Rin died because of you? No. Naruto's expression suddenly hardened to ice-cold steel. His disdainful and accusing glare pierced through the fox's heart, but he didn't raise his voice. But it would have been better if Naruto started shouting because his cold tones sent a shiver down Kurama's spine. I think Rin died because of you. You were the one who told me to confess. She went to that place because I told her that Obito was still alive. She wouldn't even be there if you hadn't forced me to tell her everything. She died because of you. This is nonsense. Kurama raised his head as he boomed, his voice viciously echoing in the slowly darkening mindscape. You really want to blame someone? Blame Uchiha Madara. It was he who ignited the flames of war, he who made the great shinobi villages dance to his tune. Blaming you or Madara, it doesn't matter. Can't you see that everything is happening again? Kakashi was right. Everybody keeps on dying around me. First Rin, the next will be my parents, then Jiji, Neji, B, Tsunade-ba-chan, Gaara, and everyone else. I let my guard down, and look what happened. You can't save everybody. I have to. I promised that I'd break the circle of hatred. Look what it's done to Rin. She died because of some pointless vengeance. I have to do something to end this madness. They believed in me. All of them. Jiraiya, my father, and Nagato. They entrusted it to me. You're not a god. You can't shoulder everything on your own. I couldn't save Rin. All of this was for nothing. Obito will turn into Tobi. How could I prevent all those things if I wasn't even able to save Rin? I've failed. Naruto's voice suddenly became weak, and his anger was gone in a heartbeat. Look at what you've already achieved. You saved Gaara's mother and his sanity. You helped to integrate the Uchiha. You got rid of Orochimaru, saved Tenzo, and Danzo is out of town. The fates of the 5 great nations are now intertwined. The bond is thin and fragile, but it's still there. You still think we've done nothing? That's bullshit. No answer came from Naruto, his eyes fixed on the green grass at Kurama's paws. A chuckle echoed in the silence, and the demon fox immediately tensed his muscles as a new presence stepped into the light. An identical blonde teen leisurely walked closer and closer to his counterpart, his hands casually clasped behind his back. His silhouette was sharp, and his until now foggy picture looked as solid as Naruto's. Only his black scara and red irises indicated that this being wasn't a simple clone. The newcomer slowly hovered around the blonde until it finally settled down next to Naruto and leaned onto his shoulder with his elbow. His face came closer until it could directly whisper into Naruto's ears. Yes. You've failed them. You made Rin march to her own death. You failed Jiraiya. You failed your father and Nagato. Look what you have done. Nothing. Nothing has changed. Naruto flinched, and his face turned into a pained grimace. You haven't failed them, Naruto! Kurama pushed. Look at the fox. He purred into Naruto's ears once again, and the blonde obediently looked up to Kurama. You listened to his advice, and what happened? She died. You don't need him. We don't need him. We can solve this alone. Kurama dangerously narrowed his eyes. However, they weren't locked on his blonde jailer but on the dark aura next to him. It's not true. We can make it through without him. Until now, he has played with your head, with your emotions. He was the one who was pulling the strings in the background. Hasn't he been manipulating you for the past few months? He stole your memories and your opportunity to tell your parents who you really are. Do you still think that after all those lies they will trust you? He ruined everything. Naruto's eyes narrowed, and they sparked with a strange glint as they looked over his friend. Kurama's voice was suddenly shaky and desperate as he hurriedly blurted out. Do you remember what happened at the Waterfall of Truth? He is here again, manipulating you and… Shut up! Just shut up and leave me alone! I don't want to hear any more. I need time to think and… A faint knock interrupted Naruto's line of thoughts as it echoed inside his mindscape. The blonde shot one more accusing glare at the bijou before his form slowly faded away. Kurama's gaze was frozen on the place the blonde had previously stood until the dark projection let out a vicious chuckle. The first steps have already been made. You bastard! I won't let you influence him. And how are you planning to stop me? He asked with a mocking smirk on his face. I'll find a way to stop you. You can count on it. Kurama sent a determined glare toward the entity, one that even Naruto would acknowledge, but it only smugly smiled back. It was challenging, and Kurama was more than eager to pick up the gloves for Naruto's sake. Kushina gradually peeked through the vibrant orange door as soon as she heard the blonde's muffled permission to enter. Her eyes danced across Naruto's slumped form and finally landed on the dark shadows under his always archly pools. The dark contour only enhanced his stabbing electric blue eyes and the sadness inside them. An invisible power squeezed her chest one last time before she stepped inside to slowly sit down next to Naruto. The blonde gradually leaned against her side, seeking comfort or some soothing warmth in the unusually cold night. She silently supported the time traveler for what felt like an eternity, not wanting to disturb him. Her hand traveled up on his spine gently to wrap it over his slumped shoulder, and Naruto bedded himself in the offered comfort almost immediately. It hurts, Naruto whispered. She gently removed the blonde's hitate, letting his golden locks shroud his tightly shut eyes and shadow his misery. It was useless anyway. Her fingers tenderly brushed and stroked his hair away from his sight, and placed a soft kiss on the blonde's forehead. I know, Kushina murmured. The small, warm contact burned Naruto's cold skin, but he didn't move. Kushina's gentle hands felt too good for his exhausted and troubled soul. It gave him the small relief he craved for. Naruto's body equilibrated on the thin verge of reality, and redeeming sleep as his troubled mind finally settled down. In a minute, he passed the delicate line to sink into a dreamless slumber, and escape from his haunting demons. Warm arms wrapped around Minato from behind, and he immediately sank into the sweet and soft embrace. He didn't open his eyes to peer over his shoulder. Kushina's sweet, vanilla scent was unmistakable. A crimson tuft fell onto his shoulder, tickling his naked skin as it slipped down slowly on his bare arm, drawing goosebumps on its way. But strangely, it still felt pleasant. Minato welcomed this mirthful sensation in the dark and cold night. It was the middle of August. The night was everything but chilly after the daytime's heat wave. Even so, the blonde had still been freezing under the bedsheet. It came from his inside, and Kushina's presence finally offered him the warmth he yearned for so much. How is Toraku? He whispered softly. Asleep. She placed a soft kiss on the back of his neck and edged as close to him as close she could from her round tummy. But this was only because of his rampage at the training ground. I think some genin teams will curse his mother's name. It will take ages and a lot of D-ranked missions to shake it back to its previous form. Kushina tried to joke, but Minato's lips formed only a mocking shadow of a real smile. It was so forced that the redhead could feel it, even if she wasn't able to actually see it. I had to put Kakashi under a genjutsu to finally calm him down. Minato muttered into his pillow, and Kushina's gentle arms squeezed him reassuringly. I'm so sorry, Minato. Kushina exhaled softly and edged even closer to her husband. But she received no answer. Her brows furrowed when Minato's muscles tensed in his back against her chest. Look at me, Minato, she asked softly. The Hokage defiantly shook his head, not caring about the nudging feeling at the back of his head where Kushina's eyes were locked on his golden crown. He stubbornly refused to face his wife. But with time, his stubbornness broke. He needed her. The fearless Hokage gradually shifted in the soft bed to face with her, revealing his silent tears as they were traveling down on his cheeks. The wet lines vividly glittered in the faint light. I'm sorry, Minato, Kushina murmured, and her arms immediately wrapped around him, and Konoha's yellow flash snuggled inside the offered embrace like a child seeking comfort from his mother. Kushina gently stroked his shaking back, desperately trying to give some redemption to her husband. After a while, Minato finally gathered himself. He couldn't stand the silence anymore. He opened his mouth, his voice cracking as his throat was still sore and dry. The missing Nin wasn't alone. The team found his partner. We know what happened only because of him. They both went after Rin, but that guy fell into a leftover trap from the war. The other left him there to die alone. Minato's brow furrowed. The other, who had killed Rin. He was butchered. Someone or something had torn him into shreds. Kushina let out a shaky breath. He deserved it. An oppressive silence loomed for a moment before Minato shifted in her embrace. I'm leaving after the funeral. The team reported something strange, and I want to see it with my own eyes. I won't be back for a week. I have to know what happened there. A deep frown appeared on Kushina's fine features. But she didn't make any comment, nor question her husband. If she had the right to know, he would tell her with time. So she inched closer to her man and wrapped her body around Minato to offer him as much comfort as she could. And also to receive her own from her loved one, as this time, it was Kushina's turn to finally mourn for her lost friend. It was a better day for a wedding than a funeral. The summer's hot wave was unmerciful and ignorant about the sad event. The hot beams happily danced on the people's black dress who gathered to say their final farewell. The ceremony was short and moderate like every shinobi's. There was no need for a big ado. Her picture gently smiled from the black frame at the people who came to remember her. There were no big piles of flowers, nor fancy bouquets. The people were silent as they paid their tribute to their fallen comrade. When the ceremony finally ended, the rest of the closest friends gathered inside the Hokage mansion. Soon, they also dropped out. Only Kushina, Minato, and the remaining members of her previous team were left behind. They silently sipped their drinks around the dining table, occasionally one of them disturbing the stillness with one or two stories about the girl whose name was Rin Noira. The promising medic, the reliable teammate, the talented kunoichi, and the kind person she was. Jiraiya was the first to leave the small group, and gradually, both Minato and Kushina retreated to clean up the remains of the burial feast. Naruto had been clinging to the same cup of lukewarm sake the toad sage had shoved into his hands during the first toast. Two exhausted eyes drifted toward his withdrawn future sensei. Kakashi hadn't said a single word since his outburst. From what he had heard from Minato, Kushina dragged him from his apartment and shoved him into one of the guest rooms. No one should have been alone in a time like this. Never. The young teen, no older than 14, looked at least a decade older to Naruto. And he seemed definitely broken. Dark rings settled below his only visible eye, and his gaze was foggy as it emotionlessly stared at his own cup of tea that he had been holding since Naruto got his cup of sake. Before Naruto could dive further into his mind, Kakashi's raspy and shaky voice interrupted his line of thought. I'm going to join Anbu. Naruto didn't reply. He didn't know what he could say to the broken boy. But Kakashi, thankfully, didn't want any answer from him. He just wanted to tell it to someone and get rid of the small burden. Naruto already knew this would happen. Kakashi, no, his Kakashi had told him that he was in Anbu for years. It was his desperate escape from reality after Rin's death. He buried his emotions and his thoughts under those years in Anbu. Kakashi interrupted Naruto's thoughts once again. You're the first one I've told. The commander approached me after Obito's death, but I had declined it back then. I had to protect Rin. An ironic, empty chuckle bubbled out under Kakashi's mask. It was so hollow that Naruto almost flinched when it echoed back once. But I guess you nor Minato nor Jiraiya are indigent for my protection. You're way above my league. The silver-haired boy seized the blonde for a long second. His emotion suddenly overran his ink-black orbs. You are way stronger than me. I am not able to protect Minato or Kushina, but you are. Naruto locked his gaze with his future sensei. The inky eyes desperately pleaded to him, and he was more than eager to remove some of the weight from Kakashi's shoulders. He could bear it. He could endure this for his sake. The blonde made a determined nod. I won't let my friends die. I promise. And I don't go back on my word. Kakashi observed the teen for a moment before he nodded and let out a relieved sigh, averting his gaze to stare out the window. The tension in his muscles visibly lessened, and they stayed in silence for long minutes. Kushina's faint voice slipped into the room as she chatted with Minato. The soft tinkling of the cutlery and the running water dimly reached Naruto's sensitive ears. The night Rin had died, Kakashi softly murmured. I saw something when I was asleep. I first thought it was a dream, but it felt so real. The pain. Kakashi's hands clenched onto his black shirt above his heart, his voice faltering, and his eye was shining with the first wave of fresh tears. Naruto's muscles tensed as Kakashi's hands released his clothes to travel toward his forehead protector to rub the cold surface of the silver insignia. Did something happen to your Sharingan? Naruto asked in a hushed tone, and Kakashi immediately stiffened. The Hatake slowly turned toward the blonde and shot him a suspicious, demanding gaze. However, Naruto didn't care about the teen's demanding eyes, slowly raising his right hand toward Kakashi's face. The teen's muscles tensed until the breaking point as the fingers inched closer and closer to him, while the blonde's expression stayed strangely hollow. Kakashi's eye widened when the blonde slipped a cold finger under the soft fabric of his hitayate. He immediately grabbed the arm to restrain him from any further movement. An ink-black, wide and confused eye stared into emotionless, cerulean blue ones. They held their gaze for unending seconds, maybe minutes. But it could have been easily more as the time seemed to pause around them. Goosebumps rose under Kakashi's attire as his always covered eye suddenly connected with the fresh air that slipped under the fabric through the tiny gap made by Naruto's finger. "Let me take a look," Naruto exhaled in a dull, but still demanding tone. Kakashi eyed the boy in front of him suspiciously, but his grip loosened on his wrist with time until he finally released it and let his arms drop into his lap. The blonde paused for a second like he wasn't really sure himself if he wanted to see what was under it. But his gaze hardened, and he gradually pushed the forehead protector up to reveal a closed eye. The scar was still pink despite the medical treatment and the long time it had to heal. It would still take months until the scar would whiten and years more for it to not stand out viciously from his skin. But it would never fade perfectly. Kakashi had to face with the ever-present reminder of Obito's death every time he looked into a mirror without his forehead protector. A cold shiver crawled up on Kakashi's spine as the summer's hot air suddenly felt chilly against his exposed skin. "Open it," Naruto said with a low, commanding voice. This time, Kakashi obeyed without hesitation. His eyelids slowly parted, revealing an all-too-familiar pattern. A lonely tear ran down from Kakashi's revealed eye. Maybe it was because of his previous thoughts, or maybe it was only because the air irritated it. A vicious crimson iris greeted Naruto as he traced back the thin, wet line on Kakashi's face. 3 stretched, ink-black triangles stood out from the ruby background, and Naruto couldn't shake off the feeling that, despite the fact that they were motionless, his eyes slowly whirled like a pinwheel in a child's innocent hands. A memory flashed inside his mind, that last stabbing glare Obito had given him before he died. That look had haunted him for months. It was filled with hatred, but deep down, it was also desperate. The black-haired man had realized something important in the last moment. It was regret. "It started," Naruto muttered with a dark and hollow voice. It was so emotionless and unusual from the blonde that Kakashi couldn't ignore the sudden need to have some space between him and the blonde. He inched backward, immediately covering his eye. "What started?" Kakashi asked with a demanding voice. However, Naruto either didn't hear him or didn't care about his question. The blonde rose from his seat and turned to leave the room, but he stopped at the opened window. "You should deactivate it. It constantly drains your chakra that way. Go to Fugaku and ask for his advice. He will help." "What started?" Kakashi stubbornly repeated his question, but Naruto just gave him one empty look over his shoulder before he jumped out of the window to disappear in the long shadows. "Yes. It started," purred an identical voice to Naruto's in his mindscape. However, instead of the blonde's sunny voice, it was dark. A copy of the blonde emerged from the tree to lean against a hollow osier tree. His footsteps creaked on the withered grass and the dead leaves that had fallen from the once sound and majestic plant. It still struggled for its life, but it was on the verge of dying. A threatening snarl stabbed through the floor where Kurama paced up and down like a real fox would do behind the bars of a cage. But it didn't concern Naruto's dark copy. He flung his head backward and let out a booming laugh. Jiraiya peered into Minato's narrowed blue eyes. His gaze was glued on the blonde's troubled expression, who slowly parted his mouth to lick his suddenly dry lips before he talked. "Repeat it once more." If Jiraiya wasn't equally troubled, he would feel annoyed. But he was also just as confused as his student. "I planted a spy in Rain just as you wished. It was hard for her to sneak inside, and it took her a damn lot of time to infiltrate the village and blend into the community. She ran a small hotel in the capital." Jiraiya shut his mouth, and the muscles in his jaw tightened before he continued. "She reported that Danzo has fled to Ama, and the people whisper that he is negotiating with Hanzo." Jiraiya closed his eyes and let out a breath to calm himself down, his expression slowly relaxing as the gathered pressure lessened inside his coils. "I had also received a message through her from Uchiha Sure. That boy is very smart for a midget. Danzo and the group slept there a week ago, and that Anbu somehow recognized her. He slipped this message into her pouch." The Toad Sage raised his hand, a small scroll trapped inside. "With the anticipation of your consent, I decoded it myself. Danzo has sided with Hanzo the Salamander, and they will meet with a slowly growing organization next Friday at 11 near Amegakure no Sato. Shursui didn't know the exact location, only the time. He will send us further information after the meeting is done. A bunch of kids have stood up against Hanzo, but they're slowly becoming a pain for the salamander, so he decided to get rid of them. They call themselves Akatsuki. And Danzo seems to think he will gain an ally for his plans. He's planning to come back to Konoha and get your seat by force with a coup. A shadow twitched under Minato's window, carefully hidden from the unwanted eyes. A deep frown was plastered on its features as the being concentrated on the discussion above with every nerve. When Jiraiya started to talk about another matter, the shadow flickered a finger on a seal carved under one of the tower's uncountable tiles. In the next moment, their conversation muffled as the small opening on the privacy seal closed. With a blur of his golden hair, Uzumaki Naruto raced toward his room to grab his backpack and head toward the village hidden in the rain. However, it was a very bad choice, since Jiraiya wasn't finished. He just paused, letting his eyes observe his student a little more before he braced himself and cleared his throat. There's something more. My spy in Kusa spotted an Uchiha. Minato stiffened, and his eyes narrowed instantly. There shouldn't be anyone there from the clan. Yeah, I know. Jiraiya whispered into the room. I have to leave the village for a few weeks to contact my people. We need more information. The Hokage slowly nodded, and the white-haired man disappeared from the office after one last glance at the motionless leader. Minato locked his gaze on the horizon, his azure eyes glued on the people of Konoha. Minato inched closer to the edge and leaned his forehead on the window, resting it on the cold surface in the hope that it would calm his burning thoughts. No one heard his whisper as it left a thin sheet of fog on the window. Toriku's Uchiha wasn't Orochimaru. Dozens of shinobi stood in a straight line at the top of a long cliff, peering down at two desperate men. A small group was dressed in Konoha's Anbu gear while the rest were wearing the attire of a different village. A Hittite shined in the dim cloudlight with 4 engraved lines, the stylized symbol of the never-ending rain of the area. An eternally cold rain poured on their already soaked clothes, flowing between the layers until it finally reached their bones. Each of them tensed their muscles, ready to attack while the rain flowed immortally from the thick, gray clouds which shrouded the azure blue sky. Nothing could be heard in the landscape, only the dripping rain, the accelerating heartbeats, and the raspy breathing from the bottom of the canyon. A blue-haired woman sucked in a breath as a man violently tossed her, and a kunai closed the distance between him and her neck. It threateningly drew a thin red line as it nicked her soft skin. A deep voice boomed into the silence, and it clearly echoed inside the canyon, not muffled by the thing he wore. His lower face was mostly obscured by a helmet-like respirator. Yahiko, as the leader of this gang, you will die here today. If you don't, this girl will get it. With a quick nod, a kunai flew toward the 2 men inside the canyon to pierce the soft mud in front of a thin man. You with the red hair. Use this to kill him. If you do, I'll let this girl free. Hanzo shook Konan once more to give weight to his previous words, not caring that the kunai was still close to the girl's throat. Don't, Nagato! Don't worry about me. You two get out of here! The kunoichi desperately shot out from the iron grip. Her eyes pleaded to every kamion and above earth in the hope that he would obey. But deep down, she had already knew that no such help would come to her. Muscles tensed until the breaking point in the shadows of a cliff. With will above a normal human, Uzumaki Naruto forced himself to wait until he could strike and flee without using anything that would reveal his real identity. If he was forced to use any of his special moves, he would be doomed. Danzo and the others would recognize the source, and that would be troublesome. A small smile appeared on his face, and he glanced back to his motionless clone who had been meditating and gathering as much energy from nature as he could manage during their minimal time. He traveled for a week with insane speed with minimal rest, but he still arrived late. He was supposed to prevent the whole meeting and not let himself to be seen by Danzo or Hanzo nor by their troops. His brows furrowed as he spied the one-eyed leader of Root. When Nagato had told him this story, the Warhawk hadn't been present. But it seemed that Danzo was desperate enough to personally attend. His azure eyes drifted to the aging man's right where a short boy with a crow mask warily observed the blue-haired girl. Naruto's teeth squeezed together when Nagato hesitantly leaned for the kunai to shakily grab the soaked barrel. Nagato couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything. His senses dulled, the noise of his own raspy breathing not reaching his brain, uncannily similar to the oddly loud sound of his drumming heart not reaching his ears. The only thing he could feel was the ice-cold surface of the kunai in his hand. His purple eyes just stared into the nothingness for a long second, but they immediately flung toward the side when he saw an orange blur at the edge of his vision. A soft, warm and familiar hand grabbed his own wrist, forcing it to move to a direction he didn't want it to. Time suddenly stopped as the ice-cold blade met with its target, and the kunai moved further and further into the flesh. The blade suddenly became warmer, and in the farthest part of his weary brain, Nagato could feel as hot liquid flowed onto his own shaking hands, soaking and warming up his fingers around the barrel of the weapon. The echo of a painful hiss could be heard inside the canyon, but it was almost immediately replaced with irritated swearing, kicking Nagato out from his temporary stasis. He slowly turned his head and desperately tried to focus his eyes to meet with the wide and surprised blue eyes of Yahiko, staring at the other side of him. The red-haired man slowly turned his head to the side, tracing his friend's sight where a grimacing brown-haired boy stood. "Could you release the kunai? It hurts like hell," he muttered with an annoyed tone. Nagato blinked in his surprise and gradually glanced down at his own hands where a second ago, he would have sworn it tore into Yahiko's flesh. Instead of finding a bloody stomach, the stranger's scarlet-stained hand gripped the blade of the kunai, restraining it while his other hand was holding Yahiko farther from the knife. The redhead flinched a step backward and immediately released the weapon. It reached the soaked surface of the ground with a loud splash, the remains of the crimson liquid already coloring a small puddle reddish under their feet where it dripped. Yahiko and Nagato stared at the stranger with wide eyes and disbelief written all over their faces while the young man in front of them only shook his bloody hand, continuously mumbling something incoherent. He seemingly wasn't in pain despite the weapon having cut his palm wide open. He looked just annoyed and irritated. The redhead narrowed his eyes on the chocolate brown. They were fixed on the strangely shaped pupils. They were horizontal like an amphibian's. He could feel a thin layer of warm chakra all over the face of the stranger, the obvious trace of a henge. A distant and painful moan shook them out from their small word, and the three men immediately flung their heads toward the source. Hanzo was obviously angry as well as the one-eyed warhawk. "You ruined my plans, stranger. You made a big mistake. I don't like when someone encroaches into my game." The named stranger only folded his arms in front of his chest, painting his clothes crimson where his hands connected with the fabric. His eyes traveled along the long line of shinobi standing above them, pausing for a second on the smallest one with the crow mask next to Danzo. They were ready to attack at the smallest sign. The stranger then just shrugged in the end before, faster than anyone could see, slamming his hands onto the ground. Almost immediately, an electrical sparkle could be heard all over the field, and dozens of elite fighters struggled under the lightning chakra coming out from the wet ground on both sides of the two leaders. However, to one shinobi's surprise, behind Danzo, the jutsu carefully avoided him. The attack didn't last long, only for a brief second, but it was enough to knock out most of the shinobi while the others obviously struggled to stay conscious or on their feet. The stranger straightened himself, carefully observing the remaining opponents for a long, tense second. Hanzo harshened his grip on the stunned kunoichi in his arms and readied his muscles to slice her throat open with the kunai still in his hands if the boy even twitched. Nagato immediately stiffened together with Yahiko, but the stranger did nothing. The boy tilted his head to the side and observed the scene silently for another long second until a wide and satisfied grin spread across his face. Then, the ground simply exploded under Hanzo's feet when a copy of the stranger jumped out from the soft soil and grabbed the kunoichi out from his hands. They gracefully landed beside the two comrades, Yahiko immediately taking care of the kunoichi and sending a thankful glance toward the stranger. A harsh voice echoed around the small team as Shimura Danzo spoke for the first time after he surveyed his remaining troops. "Who are you?" The stranger tilted his head to the side again, eyeing the man for a never-ending moment before a large grin appeared on his face, his golden eyes sparkling with a cheeky glow. "The hero. Who else?" Danzo took a step forward, hostility practically seeping through his skin. "You are a powerful shinobi. We can be useful to each other." A strange noise left the stranger's lips, close to a chuckle as if Danzo had just made a joke. "I don't think we would get along, jerk." Danzo dangerously narrowed his eyes, observing every movement on the stranger's face, every twitch of his muscles. The way he carried himself, the way he stayed stoic even in this desperate situation in front of them. The confidence and power he was radiating. The two leaders made a quick glance at each other, and a silent unity formed in that mere second. Most of their troops were down, and that man over there was too powerful. "We're leaving," Danzo stated with an emotionless voice. However, if looks could kill, the boy would have been dead by then. "I'll be watching you," the boy warned them and narrowed his eyes. His pulse drifted toward Shursui for a second and slowly lowered his head. A small nod? A simple movement, what everyone else would just toss to the side. But for the kid, it told everything that he needed. An ally from Konoha. With this, the remains of the two groups slowly melted away, withdrawing into the shadows where they came from without any further words. A relieved sigh left the stranger, and his composure relaxed as he turned around with a wide grin on his face. "So guys, have you got a warm and dry place where we can talk?" The still stunned Yahiko only nodded, his mouth slightly open, before he turned around and took the lead. Questions burned the insides of Nagato. He was confused. Curious. But the four of them walked silently toward their hideout. The redhead fixed his gaze on the stranger's back while he casually and cheerfully marched behind Yahiko. Conan slowly opened her mouth to finally break the silence, but without turning around, the stranger simply raised his hand and shook his head. A little bit later, Conan. The kunoichi's mouth fell open, and she shared a confused glance with Nagato. The small team walked for another half hour in complete silence, each of them buried inside their own thoughts while the stranger just crooned something cheerfully until they finally reached their hideout carved into the hard stone of a canyon. Suspicious glances followed them as the group passed several curious shinobi and finally settled down into a bigger chamber. The blonde stranger had taken a look around and took out a small paper tag from his pouch. When he channeled a small amount of chakra into the piece of paper, all of them felt like they were submerged underwater. The noises behind the wooden door became numb, and the air ruffled oddly around them. The stranger settled down on one of the chairs. Then, his eyes turned toward Yahiko. An odd curiosity sparkled in his eyes while his golden orbs observed him carefully from head to toe. "You can ask now." It was the orange-haired leader who asked the question that had been hovering around everyone's mind. "Who are you?" The stranger made a wandering face before it moved to several other expressions, ranging from annoyed and passive, sullen, and ending on surrender. It was like he was having a silent conversation, or most likely a vehement argument, with someone. And he had lost it. In the end, he just shrugged. "I had to help you to prevent a chain of events which should never be happening, and my name is Naruto." Nagato narrowed his eyes, observing the boy in front of him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. It was the same odd name from Jiraiya's book. It was strange how he said it. It wasn't just a simple introduction. It sounded like he was offering much more with revealing his name than that. An offering of trust. "What events?" Conan took a step forward, her eyes mirroring only curiosity. Nagato glanced around. It was strange. Neither Conan's nor Yahiko's eyes showed suspicion. But still, using a name from Jiraiya's book was more than suspicious for him. It was manipulative. The boy didn't answer immediately. His eyes locked on the empty table in front of them before it moved to pierce Nagato's purple irises. "The Rinnegan could be a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands." The redhead eyed him for a long moment, his brows furrowed. "We don't know you. The meeting was kept secret between only the three of us. How did you know about it?" Naruto made a face like he was looking for words. "Let's just say, we've got a mutual friend who had told me about it." "Who?" Nagato pushed further. "You wouldn't believe me, and it doesn't matter anyway." Naruto shrugged again. "Try us. Maybe we will believe it." Yahiko took a step forward to wait his previous words, but the stranger's eyes were still locked on Nagato. Up until now, Naruto's attention was glued on the Rinnegan wielder, despite the fact that Yahiko was the leader of the gang. "Let's say it was my sensei, but it would still not be entirely true." A frown appeared on the leader's face. "Don't misunderstand me, I'm grateful for your help. You saved both Conan and I. But why should we trust you? You just appeared from nowhere with a false name, with a false appearance, and you ask us to trust in you?" "Yes." His voice was calm, which stroked their innards like a mother's hand while Naruto slowly straightened himself. Then, suddenly, a sulking expression appeared on his face. "And Naruto is my real name." The stranger's muscles tensed, his previous expression hardening. The mood twisted around him, as this time, his eyes were serious. "I came here to warn you." Yahiko narrowed his eyes and stepped in front of Naruto. "Warn about what?" The boy closed his eyes, his muscles tensing even more, and the henge slowly dispersed. Yahiko flinched a step back when the golden eyes switched with piercing azure blue orbs. The chestnut hair disappeared, and golden, spiky locks took its place. The flawless skin on his face was replaced with 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks. Ame had been isolated for years since the Second Shinobi War, but rumors still reached them, rumors about a fighter with that same golden, spiky hair and piercing cerulean eyes, rumors that told them to run for their lives if they met with a man from Konoha. "You are the Yellow Flash." Naruto tilted his head to the side with a strange expression, then flung his head backwards. His loud and childish laughter filled the room in a blink of a second, and it stayed there for a pregnant minute. When it finally died down and the stranger collected himself, the blonde shook his head and waved a hand to the puzzled leader. "Close, but not true." The blonde gathered his expression, his previously childish face moving into a serious look once again. "Conan, Nagato, and Yahiko, leader of the Akatsuki. If a man in a mask appears with a man who looks like an aloe vera, do not listen to him." Yahiko narrowed his eyes and held out a hand to stop Conan, who already opened her mouth to talk. "Why?" Because that bastard will. The shinobi closed his eyes for a second, a roller coaster of feelings falling from his face. A second later, he shook off his swaying emotions and braced himself. His words echoed confidently. Because you're all seeking real peace. But the peace he will offer is false. Nothing else, just the deceit of reality. If you stand in with him, you will bring destruction to the shinobi world. Oppressive silence fell onto the room by the heavy words. Tension gathered around them, thick and sticky with the promise that if someone tried, the pressure could be palpated with their bare hands. You were talking about Uchiha Madara, Yahiko stated calmly, his voice knifing through the previous silence. Naruto immediately froze, and the blood ran out of his face. In the next second, anger rose inside his chest, bubbling and eating away his mind like acid. Azure blue eyes suddenly glowed in a brilliant crimson color, while chakra flames started to flicker on his trembling shoulders, flipping from gold to orange from time to time. His voice boomed inside the room, leaving an odd aura where it connected with the walls to echo back a millisecond later. He is here? He pressed the words out through gritted teeth. Yahiko tilted his head to the side, observing the boy in front of them. He could feel distantly as Conan's body started to tremble with the rhythm of the flipping chakra flames, but she still inched closer to him to position herself between him and the unknown force. Nagato also tensed, ready to attack and defend them if he had to. The leader narrowed his eyes and forced his voice to sound as calm as possible in the strain around them. But he left. Naruto growled, and the golden flames slowly started to fade away from his frame. A heavy breath left his mouth. Yahiko narrowed his eyes until they were only slits. That sheer power which appeared just then was unbelievable. It was warm like a sunny day during summer that he had experienced only once in his life when he was just a boy, heartwarming like the sunbeams he had yearned to experience once again in his homeland. But he was also sure in one thing now: if he had wanted them dead, they already would have been. The leader made his decision. He was here a week ago, talked to us about joining our forces, but I refused. Did he say anything about when he'd be coming back? Naruto's voice was strained. Yahiko didn't answer, just watched their new companion for a silent moment before he shook his head. No. The stranger's shoulders slumped. He told me that. 3 heads flung in Nagato's direction, causing the man to flinch back in surprise before he resumed. He told me he'd be waiting for me every day at the same time in the same place. He was really there every day for the next 4 days. But 3 days ago, he told me that he'd be back at the end of October. Naruto closed his eyes while covering them with his trembling hand, his anxiety almost seeping from his pores. He desperately shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Then, his head snapped to the side as his harsh voice broke the silence. I know, Kurama! Don't lecture me! I know he's preparing for my birth! The blond boy suddenly stiffened and spread his fingers to sneak a peek at his companions. He offered an embarrassed smile while scratching his cheek childishly. I said that out loud, didn't I? Nagato took a step closer. What did you mean by that? Nothing. It's a long story. Maybe one day I'll tell you everything. Really? Naruto let out a sigh and ran his hand through his golden locks. He was obviously tired and troubled. I'm sorry. I have to go now. Who are you? Nagato took another step toward Naruto, his purple eyes narrowed and demanding. I already told you, my name is Naruto, he repeated. The redhead only shook his head. No. Who are you really? What is your true purpose here? The blond teen tilted his head to the side with a wondering look which then turned into a sad smile. It slowly morphed into something else. His gaze hardened, and his electric blue eyes pinned Nagato to the ground. I am the one who will bring peace. I am the one who will break the circle of hatred. I am the savior. How arrogant. Yahiko mused silently, his brow furrowing in disapproval. The gang leader's eyes traveled toward the pools of icy blue, and he suddenly recognized the emotion. It wasn't arrogance as he first thought. It was determination with the strength to move mountains. And Yahiko, leader of the Akatsuki, bowed to his determination. The bar was crowded with civilians. People joked, sang, and shouted at each other while the smell of tobacco, cheap sake, and junk food filled the air. 2 figures sat next to the counter, one of them slowly slurping his ramen while the other ran his eyes through the crowd, scrutinizing every single man and woman for a short period. A grimace appeared behind the dark mask which had managed to shroud most of his face while leaving only his obsidian eyes and short brown locks visible. After a moment, he also turned back to the counter to lean against his palm. We should have headed back straight to the village, boss. The second man with chestnut hair and similarly colored eyes shrugged and took another slurp from his soup. If there were any shinobi around, he would recognize the thin layer of chakra on their features, the sign of a simple henge to hide their real identities. One of Uzumaki Naruto enjoying his meal and a clone for diversion. I was hungry. Don't complain. The clone with the mask let out a snort, then suddenly stiffened for a moment. If anyone had made a second glance on the man, they would have noticed that the obsidian black eyes morphed into brilliant red while 6 thick, black whisker marks appeared on his cheeks. We should hurry back before they find out that you just left a clone. And the only thing you could think of was your stomach. Again. The brown-haired man simply shrugged once more and ordered a second bowl. Minato won't notice the difference. Even with the Byakugan, they wouldn't be able to realize the difference between me and the clone I left behind Konoha. I pumped enough chakra to last for 3 weeks. A scowl appeared on his face suddenly. What do you want? I told you I didn't want to talk for a while. The masked man indifferently shrugged, but his red eyes suddenly widened and flickered to the side for a second. The pools slowly and sneakily wandered to the other end of the pub, locking on the bamboo wall for a second with a puzzled sparkle. Gears turned inside his skull, and finally, an odd, sly grin appeared behind the mask. But his companion wasn't aware as all of his attention was glued on his steaming bowl. Nothing serious. Thinking of trying out some sake. At least we're again in touch with Akatsuki after so long. The brown-haired man rolled his eyes and continued slurping his soup indifferently. We're running out of time. The brown-haired man finally stopped. It took a long time until he replied in a low tone. I know. The brown-haired man let out a long sigh and put down his chopsticks to stare at the half-eaten ramen in his bowl. The moon's eye plan won't succeed without all of the bijou. You need to get closer to Kushina during the childbirth. Use Minato's trust and strike during the labor. I'm sure he will allow you to be there. You can act as a guard, then strike. That is the only time when we have a chance, and he will be occupied with the childbirth. Red eyes locked on the man in front of him, observing him for a long silent minute until he finally glanced up and opened his mouth to reply. I know. I'll do what needs to be done. Don't let your emotions influence you. This has to be done. Don't try to reason, don't do anything other than strike. Your only chance is before he can touch the seal. I know. But Minato, Kushina. He wanted to continue, but he failed. The brown-haired man clenched his hands into fists, his joints becoming white by the restraint. I already screwed up when I had the chance. I'll do it this time. I'll kill him. His voice died down, but not enough to call it a whisper. It was more of a rasp than anything else. Naruto quickly dismissed the clone next to him and dropped the henge as soon he spotted the familiar wooden door of Konoha in the distance. He was glad that he knew the village like the back of his hand. The crack on the wall, his secret passage from his childhood, was still hidden behind a large bush. He hopped down next to the counter at Ichiraku without anyone noticing his arrival after he switched with and dismissed the clone that had been impersonating him for the last week. His peace wasn't long-lasting though. Within minutes, Naruto felt a hand on his shoulder, and the familiar chakra signature of his sensei filled his senses almost immediately. Can I join you, Taraku? A wide grin appeared on his fine features while he motioned toward the empty seat next to him. The stress and the burden of the upcoming events faded away a little by his company and by his wide smile. What's up, Jiraiya? It's still Jiraiya-sensei for you, brat. Okay. Jiraiya-sensei. So, how's your research pet project going? A grin appeared on the Sanin's face while he settled down next to the teen. Good. I already found a publisher who is interested in my new book. What will be the title? It's Aika Paradise. Naruto only gave a wide grin in response while Tsuchi put down a bowl of the steaming, fine food in front of him. How was your last mission? Jiraiya grimaced. Went well despite a rat. Naruto made a sly glance while he sucked in a big pile of noodles, sending some droplets all over the counter. After one huge gulp, he raised a curious eyebrow while he dug deep into his bowl to fish out his next portion. What rat? It's a long story. When we get some time, I'll tell you about it. Another loud slurp and the roll of noodles was gone. I've got time. Naruto happily dug his chopstick into the steaming liquid to fish out a whirling fish cake and another, proper amount soft noodles. The toad Sanin inched closer. He eyed the teen for a long moment as he lost himself in his own small world. Just him and his ramen. Jiraiya leaned onto his palm casually. How was the weather in Ame? Don't even ask. The cold managed to seep into my bones. Windy, foggy and rainy. Naruto grimaced, but his mouth left open as he artlessly chewed his food. That was very Naruto-ish. Congratulations. The fox's voice echoed within his mind, but strangely it didn't seem as satisfied or as smug as when he usually insulted the blonde. Then, Naruto's veins flooded with ice. The chopstick froze in midair while a proper amount of noodles slipped back into the bowl, sending steaming droplets of hot soup everywhere. Another chakra signature appeared from nowhere behind his back. There were a familiar buzzing feeling in his father's seal just milliseconds before. But he didn't dare to even twitch his fingers when a familiar hand grabbed his shoulder. His father's hand, which always tapped him gently, which squeezed his shoulders with care and concern. It was now holding him firmly, the fingers painfully and threateningly digging into his flesh. Naruto's eyes slowly drifted toward his sensei, whose warm expression had melted away from his face. The look in Jiraiya's eyes sent a freezing chill down Naruto's spine. What he found there in those eyes made his own azure blue orbs to slip to the side. His once sensei's gaze painfully stabbed the middle of his heart, shook him to the very core. Not even 5 seconds ago, they were warm and caring, but now, they were looking back at him with a glacial rage. He heard a soft ruffle as his father leaned close and blonde locks brushed against blonde locks. A second later, he could feel the man's breath on his earlobe before his hissing voice spoke accusingly. "The game is over, boy. If you resist, I will kill you with my own hands. Understood?" The hair on his neck immediately started to stretch toward the sky as a shiver crawled up his spine. A small, almost unnoticeable nod left Naruto's body while his mind struggled behind two instincts which had been carved deep into every human's core. His mind struggled between the instincts to attack or flee, but in his state, he couldn't decide. In the end, time gave him the answer. He felt a sharp pain where his neck connected with his skull, and he embraced the rush of darkness like an old friend to flee from the situation. "We are running out of time." A shadow twitched in a corner, shrouded by a thick bamboo wall. A man in the middle of his 40s flung his wide and horrified gaze toward his shoulder where a tiny green toad was hiding beneath his long white locks. His muscles tensed to the point it hurt, and his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitened from the strain. Inhuman anger rose from his core. The last shreds of his self-control were just barely restraining him from the bloody rampage he so desperately wanted. Disappointment rose above his rage, disappointment in himself, about his own judgment, about his own observation skills. The small green toad had opened its mouth one more time, human voices coming from it. A voice which he had known for almost a year, the voice of a man who he trusted so much he handed over his own life into his hands. There was a long hesitant pause before Jiraiya heard the almost inaudible reply. "I know." Jiraiya's blood froze. "The Moon's Eye plan won't succeed without all of the bijou. You need to get closer to Kushina during the childbirth. Use Minato's trust and strike during the labor. I'm sure he will allow you to be there. You can act as a guard, then strike. That is the only time when we have a chance, and he will be occupied with the childbirth." Another pause. "I know. I'll do what needs to be done. Don't let your emotions influence you. This has to be done. Don't try to reason, don't do anything other than strike. Your only chance is before he can touch the seal." "I know. Minato, Kushina." There was a choking sound. "I already screwed up when I had the chance. I'll do it this time. I'll kill him." The voice died down until it was just the ghost of a whisper. Jiraiya's teeth clenched together with such force that they threatened to crack. How could he have been so naive? So blind? How could he have misjudged this boy so direly? He would bring a new chance for a prophecy. Yeah. A new chance that the prophecy would never be fulfilled with the death of Minato. The Toad Sage's muscles started to tremble, worry successfully masking his still rising fury that filled his chest. He slowly moved his head to the side and snuck a peek between the lines of the bamboo fence toward the two men at the counter who he bumped into half an hour ago accidentally. He almost missed them. He was occupied with a black-haired brunette behind the curtains of a small bar when a name caught his ears, and a familiar voice forced its way into the bar between the curtains. It was Toriku's voice for sure. The same tone, the same reactions, the same words he was so familiar with. First, he was curious. Why was the blonde boy here? Jiraiya had thought he was assigned on a mission by Minato. But when he spotted the boy wearing an almost perfectly masked henge while walking together with a stranger, he started to have doubts. Stealth and spying were his specialty, so he followed them into the bar and sent a small toad to hide in the shadows of the counter so that he could eavesdrop from a safe distance. What he had heard squeezed his chest painfully. Toriku sought the deaths of Minato and Kushina. After a year since he had shown up. Why? Why he didn't show his real intentions during that period? Why didn't he strike then? He had gotten countless opportunities to kill them over the years, but he didn't. None of it made any sense. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. They talked about Akatsuki, the same organization he had just received information about from his spy Inama. They were a growing group, or most likely a gang, who were fighting against Hanzo. They wanted peace, an end to their nation's suffering. Jiraiya shut his eyes and squeezed his hands into fists while his mind raced through the overheard conversation once more. The Moon's Eye plan won't succeed without all of the bijou. Then the answer revealed itself so ruthlessly that he couldn't help but flinch. The birth, the seal, oh my god. They want the QB. With this one last thought, the Toad Sage disappeared from the small pub to head back to his village with speed enough to rival the Yellow Flash. When Naruto woke, he found himself once again in the empty room with the two-sided mirror. He was secured to the same chair with the same leather shackles, and he could spot several paralysis seals on various, not to mention important, parts of his body. He tried to move, but he couldn't feel his limbs. It was like they weren't even there. Even his innards were numbing as the suppression seals burned around his torso. He could barely feel his once bottomless power, but the small amount he could still sense restlessly whirled inside him like it couldn't find its proper place in his coils. In his desperation, he considered reaching out for Senjutsu or for Kurama's chakra, but he dismissed the idea in an instant. He didn't intend to do so. At least, not in the near future. He didn't put any effort to pay attention to his surroundings, nor to the room on the other side of the mirror. They would come soon anyway. He could sense his father's and Jiraiya's faint chakra signatures, while Minato's dim scent also lingered in the air around him. Naruto stayed motionless for the next minutes in total silence. However, it could have easily been hours for all he knew. His sense of time was dulled by the numerous seals on his body. His head flung freely onto his chest, his mind surprisingly empty. He was waiting for something to happen or for somebody to show up and start to question him. Finally, he slowly raised his head a little and sneaked a peek between his blonde locks. He spotted a smaller, metal rolling shelf in the corner, similar to one that people would use to serve food. But Naruto doubted there were snacks under the brown sackcloth. He spotted several ominous dark brown spots at the corner of the fabric, and a cold shiver ran up on his spine to raise the hair on his arms and the back of his neck. He let his head fall back onto his chest and forced down the sudden lump in his throat. He didn't feel weary. He simply felt dead and betrayed. He had counted on the fact that this would happen with time, of course, but he thought Minato would first try to speak with him before he made a drastic step like this. And not to mention that he was so curious as to how on earth they know he was Inama. He wasn't even angry at himself. It was still so shocking to him. It was a silly slip. Something only he would do. How could he have answered that question so casually? He didn't even notice the suspicious question. It was so natural. Chatting with Jiraiya and eating ramen made him lower his guard, and the Toad Sage had played him for a fool. So the words slipped between his lips by instinct. Finally, the door's squealing sound kicked him out from his musings. He slowly lifted his head, only to have enough space between his bangs to catch a glint of the betrayed look on Inoichi's features as the man slowly walked closer to his slumped form. His golden locks hung freely onto his forehead without his hitate, which had probably been removed at the moment they knocked him out. Konoha would never willingly allow a traitor wear their insignia. He glanced up between his locks once more and lowered his head down again when Inoichi reached the chair next to him. "I'm sorry," Naruto mumbled, but Inoichi either didn't hear or simply ignored him. Without a warning or even a word, the interrogator placed his warm palm on his forehead. It would have felt soothing in the suddenly cold room, if Naruto hadn't known what was going to happen next. There was a sudden and painful stab at the back of his head as Inoichi forcefully slammed against the defensive barriers of his mind. Chapter 28, Cloudlight. Sarutobi Hiruzen silently ran his eyes through the small apartment. Even 2 weeks after the funeral, Minato hadn't gotten the courage to pack and clean Noerarin's place. Everything was left untouched, and only the thin layer of dust indicated that the place had been abandoned. The third walked into the bedroom, his eyes drifting from place to place until they settled on the small desk in the corner. His gaze lingered on the lines of medical scrolls placed in tidy piles, but his eyes caught a glimpse of a scroll that was out of place. It didn't have a title, and it was tucked deep under the mess. However, the edge of the paper was worn out like it was used daily. He carefully slipped it out from under the rest and immediately unrolled it. It was a general storage scroll. He had arrived back from his training trip just in time to attend the funeral. However, he wasn't close to the girl, but as a once Hokage, he felt that it was his duty to attend, just like with the loss of every single shinobi during his reign. So, how did he find himself inside the locked apartment of a dead comrade? He was driven by his curiosity. His wife did tell him that the girl was looking for an audience before her death. But he pushed it aside in favor for other topics until now. But the nudging feeling never stopped. The girl wanted to tell him something important, especially if she hadn't turned to Minato nor Jiraiya. Sarutobi furrowed his brow and channeled some chakra into the closing seal. It wasn't a fancy design, Just a regular one you could have bought at every single shinobi shop if you had the money for it. The seal immediately obeyed, releasing its contents in an instant. The small puff of smoke cleared, revealing a lonely sheet of paper as its only content. It was just plain notepaper, the edge jagged as it was torn it out from a notebook. But the third immediately recognized the tidy handwriting. The perfect strokes, the unswerving lines. He had supervised his late student for years until he reached that level. Hiruzen studied it for a long minute, disregarding his suddenly loud heartbeat and rereading what was before him over and over again. His eyes were wide and confused as soon he realized what was in his hands. He released his grip on the storage scroll, and it rolled to the farthest corner of the room with a loud thud, stirring up the soft dust on its way. Millions of dust motes danced slowly and sparkled in the sunlight, but Sarutobi's gaze was unfocused. He stood there motionless, while gears turned in his head, dots connected with insane speed and more parts of the jigsaw clicked into place. A puzzle that hadn't let him rest ever since a blonde boy crashed into the village. Yamanaka Inoichi was shocked beyond words when Konoha's fastest messenger hawk knocked hurriedly on his window with its sharp beak. It didn't waste any time because as soon as the mind reader opened the window, the hawk turned to reveal the small brown package on its back with an immediate summon from his Hokage to Konoha's torture and interrogation headquarters. When he stepped into the room, he was directed and found himself face to face with Minato. He almost made a step backward. The look on his Hokage, on his friend, was the perfect mask of immense betrayal that painted dark rings under his blue eyes. Inoichi gradually looked to the other occupants of the room when he finally gathered enough willpower to tear his gaze away from Minato's tortured face. Jiraiya looked equally broken, weary, disappointed and betrayed beyond words. He could think of only one common thing which could trigger something like this from all of them. Only one person got in his mind, and it made his stomach flip. Inoichi slowly turned his head toward the two-sided mirror to see the slumped form secured to the chair. The familiar mop of untidy blonde hair shrouded the captive's face, but he knew very well that he would find azure eyes and whisker-marked cheeks under the golden mass. It was Namikaze Toriku, he remembered. And by the betrayed looks, he was a threat. Inoichi clenched his hands into fists and glanced up to Minato, his eyes pleading to every kami to let him be wrong. But his hope disappeared when Minato looked away from his pleading gaze as he gave his order. You are authorized to use force. I want to know everything from his past. Do what is necessary. Inoichi nodded unsteadily, but as a veteran, he immediately tried to harden his emotions. But he failed pitifully. He let his own feelings surface when he stepped inside the room. He was aware that it flickered through his face, but he didn't care. He had heard the boy mumble a faint apology, but he ignored it. He felt equally angry and betrayed. He let the boy into his house, into his life, even shared his joy with him when his daughter had been born. With one last glare at the blonde crown, Inoichi raised his hand and slipped it under the golden hair. His hot palm connected with the boy's ice-cold forehead, and the interrogator released his jutsu, to this time, forcefully enter his mind. Inoichi found himself on the familiar passage he hadn't visited for long months. But what he found there shocked him to his very core. A blonde girl stood in front of him with folded arms and a stern expression on her fine features between the shelves, blocking his way toward the boy's memories. The very same blonde girl whose death he witnessed when he had first entered the boy's mind. Her lengthy, platinum blonde ponytail freely hung on her lean back, determined eyes observing him suspiciously. They stood there for a long silent minute, only observing each other and waiting for the other to make the first step. Inoichi was the first to open his mouth to demand an explanation, but the girl interrupted him before he could start his sentence. I won't let you go further. Inoichi frowned with confusion, so he asked the simplest question. Why? Because you are here against his will. The interrogator stayed in silence for another long section, his eyes glued on the determined girl, while his mind raced over several options. Are you a projection of his consciousness? The girl raised an amused eyebrow. No. Then what are you? A projection, an echo, a memory, a mirage. Choose what you like. It doesn't matter. But I won't let you go any further. Inoichi's frown hardened. If you aren't part of his consciousness, why won't you let me through? The girl's eyes hardened, but her lips turned up into a soft smile. Because he is one of my precious people. Inoichi narrowed his eyes. He was definitely facing with a mental barrier. But he didn't find anything like that until now. Heck. He never saw anything like that before. He saw the projection of the consciousness fighting with him in the form of the actual person, but never another. He'd seen and met traps, locked, chained, sealed doors and once even a labyrinth, but never another person defending the consciousness. But this meant that this barrier was here since the girl had died. Why didn't you show up earlier? The girl shrugged and disregarded his question, instead, stubbornly repeating her first statement. I won't let you go further. Inoichi let out a weary sigh. This would be much harder than he first thought. He started to run through a short chain of hand signs, but to his biggest surprise, the girl in front of him did the same. In the next blink, two mind techniques triggered against each other, putting out each other's effect. The girl was good. He had to admit. Inoichi narrowed his eyes, but before he could move, the girl suddenly disappeared and reappeared in front of him, one hand extended, a graceful finger touching his forehead, while a sad smile was plastered on her face. Her azure eyes pleadingly locked on his own. Leave. Please, I don't want to hurt you. But he didn't listen. He narrowed his eyes and tensed his muscles to gain distance, but before he could jump backward, the girl simply pushed him out from the blonde's consciousness with one swift jolt of her chakra. Inoichi stumbled backward to seek support until his back hit a wall. His eyes were wide in his surprise while his heavy breathing echoed in the small room. Naruto flung his head up, his eyes equally wide in his shock and confusion. His breathing was as harsh as Inoichi's. The two blondes gathered themselves in the next seconds, and Inoichi shook his head to clear his thoughts. He wasn't in his mindscape for more than 1 minute, and he felt himself absolutely drained. His throat was suddenly dry as his voice cracked in the room. Wah, what was that? Naruto shook his head to clear his own spinning brain before he answered, his voice equally shaky. I don't know. I didn't know she was there. I don't know when she... The room dangerously slipped under Inoichi's wobbling legs. The mind reader rushed out from the room just in time to avoid an embarrassing moment in front of a captive. When he shut the door behind him, he immediately leaned to the opposite wall of the passage to seek support so he could calm down his waving stomach and spinning brain. A small droplet of cold sweat traveled down from his forehead to land on the floor with an unnaturally loud splash. Inoichi knew those symptoms too well, but he never felt them himself. It was the after effect of a powerful mind jutsu. He shook his head once again, braced himself, and dragged himself inside the other room as the disturbing sensation died down to a manageable level. He met 3 pairs of concerned eyes. The lead interrogator Kawamakoto also joined their ranks, waiting for his own turn. Inoichi shook his head once again and dropped himself on the inviting empty chair so his still trembling legs could have a break. Minato stepped closer, but Inoichi shook his head. He was afraid that if he opened his mouth, he would throw up on the Hokage. Another wave of nausea rushed through him. The interrogator immediately squeezed his eyes shut and pressed his palms on his eyes to fight with the symptoms as best he could. The others didn't distract him, even if that was what they wanted at the moment. They patiently waited for him to finally gather himself. He was able to do so, but only after a long, tensed minute. He slowly let his hands fall into his lap and raised his head toward Minato. I'm sorry. It seems I won't be able to use my regular interrogation jutsu on him. The girl from his memory fragment, she had put a mental barrier on him, and a damn strong one. I've never ever met anything like that before. She wasn't attacking physically, she used a mind jutsu like me. Those in a mindscape have an increased power, and the advantage of home was on her side. I can break the barrier, but it'll take time, maybe days. We don't have days. We need answers now. Minato started to massage the bridge of his nose in frustration. We will move on the traditional ways. I'll give him one last chance. We will try to interrogate him before I hand him to Makoto for a more. Minato's eyes drifted into the room with the equally shaken blonde, and his eyes traveled toward the veiled metal table. Drastic ways. Minato couldn't help himself. Despite what he knew, he still wanted to give one last chance to the boy before he handed him over. If he confesses to them, he wouldn't have to suffer. Inoichi nodded, watching as the 2 men left the room and entered to the other one. They shared a glance with Makoto before they turned their attention fully on Minato, who took the role of an interrogator while Jiraiya settled down in the background. Minato locked his stabbing eyes on the slumped form. The boy hadn't moved since they stepped in, but their eyes met for a fraction of a second when the boy peeked between his golden bangs. Anger rose in Minato, and he desperately tried to collect himself, but when he opened his mouth to demand answers, the restrained fury in his voice was transparent. What's your name? I'm Namikaze. You are not a Namikaze anymore. Minato hissed out as he walked closer until he threateningly towered above the secured shinobi. Naruto finally realized that at that very moment he wasn't facing his father, his friend, nor his brother from the last year. Namikaze Minato, the kind and always smiling shinobi, wasn't here with him at the moment. He was faced with the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. His voice and his blue eyes were cold as ice, without any love or care, only animalistic fury, sheer hatred and disappointment burned in those azure irises. He was now the man who would do anything to protect his village from danger. and this man was now thinking he was the threat. Danger to his loved ones, to his comrades, to the citizens of Konoha. Naruto slowly raised his head and turned toward his teacher, carefully avoiding Minato's burning eyes. Jiraiya? Do you remember when we were talking on that tree branch towards Suna? The Sannin nodded. He remembered very well that conversation when Toriko asked to kill him if he ever lost himself. Who would forget that kind of promise? I want to absolve you of your promise. You can't absolve me from that promise because you are not him, Jiraiya stated with a calm and collected voice, but he couldn't really hide the cold edge of it. Naruto hesitantly tried to shrug, but his muscles weren't obeying his will. The shrug reminded the Toad Sannin more of an awkward twitch or spasm than the intended motion. Maybe it's true. I'm not exactly him, but he is in me, and I was in him. His previous experiences, his feelings, his care, and his bonds are here with me. I'm very grateful for him, you know. He saved me, and he gave back a part of me that I thought I had lost long ago. It's funny that he built similar bonds as me, however, in a different perspective and way. Naruto lifted his head and looked straight into Jiraiya's narrowed eyes. Sensei. He braced himself, and finally, his head moved toward Minato. Family. A sad smile crossed his face. But Minato didn't care for his previous words. He asked once more, this time another question with the same cold and demanding tone. Where are you from? Naruto averted his eyes and started to fix his gaze on the streaks and curves of the wooden table in front of him. He stayed in silence for several moments before he slowly licked his sore lips to answer to his father. I was born in Konoha. You weren't born in Konoha, Minato stated calmly. True. Technically I was born outside of the village because of some special circumstances of my mother. An awkward chuckle bubbled out from Naruto's dry throat. Jiraiya finally took a step closer. Drop the act, kid. We know you are from Amegakure. Ame? Why do you think I'm from Ame? Naruto raised his eyes curiously to Jiraiya, who frowned back at him, folding his arms together in front of his chest before he answered. We know about Akatsuki's plan. We know about they are after the Jinchuriki and the 9 Bija. We know you are here to steal the Kyuubi from Konoha's Jinchuriki. Don't use that. Don't use that word. I hate it. Naruto suddenly spat out, his tone filled with disgust. Anger overwhelmed the young Hokage's mind once again, but Jiraiya thankfully continued before Minato's anger could rise to an unmanageable level. I know you had been working with Nagato before he died, and you are part of the Akatsuki. Naruto frowned, but after a second, he burst out with a hysterical laugh. Me? Hee, as the member of Akatsuki. Well, that was good. He slowly braced himself and forced his trembling body and the giggles to finally die down. So you aren't denying that you had worked together with Nagato before he had died? Jiraiya stated. Yes and no. Naruto giggled once more, and the frown deepened on the Toad Sage's features. Minato finally lost his composure, as the previously manageable anger overflowed his dams. The Hokage slammed his fist into the small table in front of them, and Naruto immediately flinched when the strength of his father reached him. Despite the several seals on his body, he couldn't shake his natural instinct to escape. Who are you? And this is your last chance to answer without torture. An unstoppable tremble ran across Naruto's body as Minato leaned threateningly close over him, flushing away his good mood immediately. His suddenly much higher form raised high above his secured body pinned to the chair, feeling himself like an ant facing its destiny, a slowly approaching boot. The Hokage's pores were emitting anger and killing intent toward him, making his gut squeeze and his hands start trembling. He finally knew now why his enemies feared him during the war, why they almost wet themselves when he appeared, and why he gained the flea on sight mark in the bingo books. Naruto slowly closed his eyes, fleeing from the scene, escaping from those cold blue eyes, running away from the room into his own mind. His eyes locked onto the soft grass of the meadow in front of Kurama, not daring to meet with his eyes. The giant fox watched him without a word before he finally opened his enormous mouth. Naruto, as he already told you, the game is over. You should confess if we don't want to take a long break again in this department, and I doubt they will be as moderate this time as the first. Yeah, it seems so, the blonde answered with a sour smile, his gaze still secured on the softly swaying grass. He gradually raised his head to meet with Kurama's searching sight. I don't want it to happen like this. I know, brat, he murmured with an unusually soft whisper. Go now. Show them that Uzumaki Naruto can do everything. Even messing with time. Naruto hesitantly nodded and slowly opened his eyes as he came back to reality. A fresh wave of dulled killing intent washed over him again, tearing into his flesh and his organs. He forced his limbs to stop trembling, and without looking up, he heard his distant voice. Send away the Anbu, Inoichi, and Makoto from the other room, and I will tell you everything. Minato narrowed his eyes to a thin line, silently weighing the boy's words. Gradually, he nodded toward the mirror as a silent order. Naruto closed his eyes again, reaching out for a tiny bit of nature's energy only enough to check that they were completely alone. Jiraiya's eyes twitched as a familiar tingling sensation got past his ears, but he immediately shook off the feeling. It was surely wrong. It couldn't have been senjutsu. He, instead, concentrated on the teen with his every nerve. Naruto let out a long, calming breath, straightened in the chair, and looked directly into Minato's azure. The young leader left a small pause before his now calm voice filled the small room. What is your purpose here? Naruto didn't answer for a short, hesitant moment, while he carefully picked his words. The question hung in the air like a guillotine above a condemned head. The Jinchuriki inhaled another bit of oxygen, and his gaze hardened with determination. To protect my precious people. Including both of you. Minato snorted. Despite what the evidence already told them, he had the guts to say something like that. He answered with a flat face and ice-cold tone. Stop this! Jiraiya had overheard your conversation in the bar yesterday. We know you are an assassin, and you are trying to strike on me and Kushina during my child's birth. The skin on Naruto's forehead wrinkled as he desperately tried to recall every single word of their previous conversation at the bar. And when he made that 2 times in a row, he gave a mental slap to himself and to Kurama. That is just half of the truth. I do plan an assassination, but I would never hurt you. My target is someone else. Minato narrowed his eyes even more. Who? Naruto tried and failed to shake his head, but the unsteadiness just vaporized from his pores. Who? Minato repeated, this time not as calm as before. I don't want to hurt you. Naruto protested, but the Toad Sannin couldn't shake off the feeling that he actually answered. The sage eyed the nervous teen until he made his decision. What was your original rank in village? Jiraiya's voice stabbed the weary and weak voice of the kid like a knife, and he made a satisfied mental smirk when the boy relaxed and moved his attention on him. A false safety before he could move back to the previous issue. Genin. He couldn't finish his sentence. Minato slammed his fist onto the table once more, causing Naruto another violent twitch. The Hokage's eyes slitted dangerously. He hissed and spit out the words between his teeth like they were sour venom, leaning into Naruto's personal space. Do you think we are stupid? Do you think we really believe that? You are not a genin. Naruto blinked, and a shiver ran through his spine as killing intent started to leak again from the pores of the Hokage. He didn't avert his gaze. Their eyes were locked defiantly while he answered. My official rank was genin. I had only one opportunity to participate in a Chunin exam when I was 13, but it was distracted by an attack. After that I had other things to be aware of. I never got another opportunity to take part in the exam. The blue orbs darkened several shades, but after a blink it was replaced by the familiar, cheeky sparkle, and a soft chuckle left him, a nostalgic expression appearing on his face. You know, I even failed the academy exams 3 times because of those damn bunshins, and I received an on-field promotion. I was the dead last of my class. I was so damn pathetic. Minato's eyes narrowed one more time. You got Namikaze blood in your veins, but not from my father. I'm not your half-brother, but I am your blood relative. Then who are you? Who made you? Was it Orochimaru? Are you one of the products of his wicked experiments? Jiraiya burst out in his frustration. He wanted answers. Now. He was slowly getting tired of this cat and mouse play. Made? Ah no, I wasn't made. And especially not by the hand of that snake freak. I was born. I was born from the love of a man and a woman. But I don't think I should explain it to you, Ero-sennin. You know bees and stuff like that. It was embarrassing enough hearing it for the first time from you, and I don't want to repeat your own lecture. Naruto chuckled awkwardly. Ero-sennin? Jiraiya repeated slowly, and deep down, he really acknowledged the nickname. Naruto looked around, eyeing them one by one. It hurt. It hurt to see as much suspicion and ice in those eyes which were once filled with love and care for him. He fixed his gaze now on Minato and gave him a small desperate smile, letting out a long breath before he proudly straightened himself in the chair as much as he could in his restraints, and with the paralysis seals on his body. I am Konoha's #1 unpredictable hyperactive, knucklehead ninja Databeo. My mother is the beautiful bloody habanero of Konoha, Uzumaki Kushina. My father is the yellow flash, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado. Everybody froze in the room, but he didn't bother to glance around, just continued. He feared that if he stopped he wouldn't be able to restart. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I will bear on the 10th of October, next month, and I had died, Or I'll die, 17 years from now at summer, sacrificing my own life during a battle. Things went wrong, very wrong. I wanted to use a modified Shiki Fujin to seal away that damn Uchiha and the Jubi. Well, actually I used it. At least I think. Naruto made a wondering look before he continued with a grimace on his face. But I always mess up everything. I couldn't even die like a normal person. I wanted to become a hero, to die with the pride that I managed to save everyone at the price of my own life. I was maybe a little bit selfish. His gaze suddenly became distant and hazed, but it was gone with his next blink. Then I find myself here, in the past. First I thought I had failed, and that bastard got me with the Sharingan, and I'm in a genjutsu. Especially when I saw you in that passage. You know, you were my role model even when I didn't know who you were, Dad. And when I heard Gigi behind the shinobi, I thought that I. So, that is my story. Time travel. Crazy stuff, huh? A small awkward chuckle left his mouth. Then Naruto sank in the chair, letting his head hang down onto his chest and his golden locks cover his eyes. You probably don't believe what I said. Sure. I also wouldn't believe it. It was hard for me to accept myself. But that is the truth. I'm from the damn future. No one spoke a word for a long, silent minute until Minato finally opened his mouth and broke the stillness of the room. You are insane. Naruto didn't bother to look up into the cold eyes of his father. His voice was weak while he whispered into the oppressive silence of the room. If I can get back my scroll you found with me, I could show you some things. I stored my personal stuff there. Training plans, the first script of the Gutsy Ninja with Ero Sennin's autograph to you, Dad. Pictures of not yet born or newborn children as teenagers. My Hittite I got from Irika-sensei. I can show you how Kakashi-sensei will look. But I can't open it until Ero Sennin lets me sign the Toad summoning contract again. I can tell you things I shouldn't know, or I can show you techniques no one else is capable of. He let out a sour chuckle in his frustration, then slowly shook his head, or at least tried. My only real evidence is in my blood and memories. Jiraiya snapped his finger, and his chakra flickered like a beacon. An Anbu appeared in the room in an instant. Make another blood test, and this time, compare it with Shinobi ID 3458. Security level SS. Do it. Now. With record speed. The Anbu gave a small nod, not to the Sannin, but to Minato and then left the room with a puff, leaving some slowly whirling leaves in the still room. None of them dared to move or voice their thoughts. Only the secured teen's faint mumbling could be heard in the tense room. I'm glad that I managed to see you all again. I was happy. Really happy. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, Ero Sennin. I failed you in your legacy. But now I will protect all of you. This time, I won't let you die. None of you. He whispered more to himself than to the people in the room. He was scared now, to his very bone. Everything was a big mess, and he was bushed. This isn't going too good, muttered the fox with a deep frown on his face. I know, Kurama. I messed up again. Naruto's voice was soft, nearly enough to call it a whisper, but Minato narrowed his eyes more if that is even possible when he picked up the words. Kurama. Back at the hospital when they had first met, he said the same name. And don't talk to me aloud. They will think you are insane. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to you aloud. They already think I'm insane. Idiot. Furball. A soft chuckle escaped him which only worsened his status. Naruto finally raised his head and looked around the room, eyeing the two motionless men inside the small space. Finally, Minato unfolded his arms and turned toward the door to leave the place without a single word. Dad, wait! Please! Naruto's desperate voice cracked. The village leader stiffened at the door, his muscles tensing, ready to jump over and tear out his organs in his already raising anger. You are going to stay here and be interrogated until you either decide to tell us the truth or your mind breaks. Please! Naruto pleaded, but it only fueled Minato's slowly raising fury, holding on to the thin line that restrained him from snapping. The Toad Sage let out a long sigh. We are finished, Gaki. Jiraiya also turned around to follow Minato, but only after shooting a puzzled look toward the young boy. His eyebrows furrowed to a thick line. What if it's possible? The sage shook his head. It can't be. But so many things would make sense then. His scroll and those closing seals, the third layer with the fox's chakra, the fourth with the summoning contract, the trap on the last layer from Mount Maiboku. His actions, his seemingly irresponsible knowledge about things. He stopped in his snail pace and glanced back at the slumped form of the boy. He was on the verge of opening his mouth, but a faint whisper from the boy stopped him. I'll do it. The faint sound also stopped Minato. his hand hovering above the door handle for a long moment before the blonde's determined voice reached his ears again. I'll do it. I'll allow you inside my mind. She won't resist this time. I'll take care of her somehow. I can show you my memories. Minato gritted his teeth and didn't answer immediately. The suffocating silences was stretched to its limits. Gradually, the Hokage turned around, his azure blue orbs meeting with identical blue ones. The same orbs which sparkled with ploy during the past months, which he watched with care and love. They were desperate. Pleading. He didn't want to see those emotions behind those eyes anymore. The only thing he wanted to see were the eyes of a man who deceived him, who was after the life of his family, who influenced his decisions, his life, and who knows what else he had already done inside the shadows. But this time, he wasn't here as Namikaze Minato. He had to act on the behalf of Konoha, and he needed answers to ensure her safety. He calmed his waving emotions and made his decision with a clear head. Minato finally nodded, and after a short hand sign and a flicker of his chakra, the weary Inoichi stepped inside the room again. He rested his eyes for a long moment on the slumped form of the blonde boy and handed over 2 devices to the 2 men inside the room which connected them with the captive's mind and his technique. Naruto felt the familiar warmth of the man's palm on his forehead, but he didn't move his body, nor reacted to the touch in any way. He could feel the gathering chakra inside Inoichi's palm, and Naruto's mouth moved to warn the interrogator in advance. Before you step in, I must warn you, Aji-san. You will see strange and confusing things. Don't freak out. Inoichi's eyes narrowed, but after a long break, he released the gathering chakra and his technique. 3 men stood inside a long passage lined with shelves slumping under scrolls and books. It was a familiar scene for the veteran interrogator. He had already been in this place dozens of times during his weekly checkups with Toriku. However, just like half an hour ago, they found themselves in front of a frowning blonde kunoichi. She defiantly stood there just like last time, her lean arms folded in front of her chest to keep them from moving any further in the captive's psyche. I've already told you. I won't let you further. Wow. I have never been here before. The 3 men and the girl immediately flung their heads toward the cheerful voice to face the young blonde man, currently observing the shelves in front of him curiously, running his fingers through the titles until a confused grimace appeared on his fine features. I didn't know that I even learned this technique. It's okay. He is here to lead us. The interrogator stepped out from the group and approached Naruto with a stern look on his face. Why have you never appeared before? The teen shrugged, and a well-known foxy grin appeared on his face after he finally turned toward them, slowly putting the scroll back on the shelf. I've never tried. What are you going to do with her? Inoichi pointed toward the blonde girl, who still stood there, her blue eyes wandering suspiciously from one intruder to another. Try to ask her kindly to let us in. Naruto shrugged once more and stepped closer to the projection of Ino with a soft smile on his face, his movement followed by Inoichi's raised eyebrow and surprised eyes. Naruto slowly approached his late comrade until there were only some steps between them. Her gaze immediately flung on his small, kind smile. They stood there, either of them talking for some time. Naruto's soft voice was the first to interrupt the peace. It's been a long time. Yeah, I think. Her voice was equally soft, but it still echoed back and forth between the shelves. Naruto eyed the girl for another stretched and silent minute before he gradually reached out to touch her hand, to make sure she was really there. But it simply slipped through her. This is your consciousness, Baka. I can't hurt you, and you can't touch me. A curious frown appeared on Naruto's face. When did you do this? The girl shook her head, her long ponytail fluidly following her motion. I don't know. I don't have memories. I'm only a projection. The essence of my original self's will. That is, to protect your mind. Inoichi frowned by the new information. There was a technique like that in the family archive. Or at least something similar to that. A Yamanaka mental barrier, which puts the protective projection of the user against an intruder. But no one had been able to use that technique for decades. And this girl looked young. Or was very young when she had died. Maybe at the same age as Toriku. Inoichi stepped forward. Will you let us pass this time? A hesitant frown appeared on the blonde girl's face. It depends on him. If he is willing to let you pass, you can pass. But only with him. I shouldn't even be here. Maybe your forced entry triggered the defensive mechanism. I think my original wasn't counting on a Yamanaka invading his mind instead of an Uchiha. Another soft smile appeared on Naruto's face. But his eyes sparkled with playful mirth. I've always known you never hated me. Even when you told me so. Baka. How should I know that? I told you, I don't have memories. A small, embarrassed smile appeared on the young girl's face, but she obediently stepped aside with a small pink shade on each of her cheeks, letting the small group pass, but she could still hear Naruto's soft, almost unnoticeable murmur. "Thank you, Ino." Minato let his eyes wander on the enormous quantity on knowledge, his eyes drifting from title to title, while Inoichi and Naruto led the small group toward the end of the passage to a wooden door, toward the memories of their captive. The small group stepped through the door, and they found themselves inside a meadow with soft and sweet grass under their feet, an unnatural, azure blue sky overhead, and endless colorful spots of wildflowers laid all over the landscape. The sweet scent of lilies immediately reached their noses, and to Minato's biggest surprise, his aching nerves immediately settled down. It was pure and peaceful. Only the shelves broke the illusion and reminded him that he was in someone else's mind and not outside. Inoichi's voice kicked him out of his musings. "Where are your old memories?" The blond boy looked around with a confused face while he scratched the crown of his head in an all-so-familiar manner they had seen thousands of times when he was puzzled. "Well, I don't know exactly. Sorry. Kurama! Help me out, please!" An irritated "ch" echoed in the meadow, but almost instantly, a point of the scene started to wave and wobble, and after a long moment, a vigorous orange door appeared in the middle of a place filled with moonflowers and crocuses. A breeze ruffled the delphiniums in the background, and Inoichi noted them with a side glance. Levity, fun, big-hearted, ardent attachment and joy. The cheekiness of Toriku. Inoichi frowned. That was definitely not the boy's voice. Maybe a split personality? And to be able to place a genjutsu in the mind. He'd never heard of anything like that before. He glanced to the side to spot a huge weeping willow surrounded by countless dark crimson roses, which weren't there during his last visit. It was definitely a memorial. A place to mourn. His eyes widened when he spotted a small, black-framed picture of a smiling girl gently placed against the base of the tree. It was Rin. Minato traced the interrogator's gaze, and he had to restrain a flinch when he also spotted the picture of his late student. He didn't know how he should feel himself. He struggled between anger and his own mourning when he spotted the picture of the kindly smiling girl. Naruto, not concerned by their sightseeing, slowly took the lead after an amused look, and opened the orange door and stepped through it. A muffled splash could be heard from the other side of the door, and the three men shared a confused and suspicious glance before they also stepped inside, following the curious Inoichi. To their biggest shock, the meadow was gone, their feet sinking into ankle-deep water. The azure blue sky and the meadow were replaced with rough, concrete walls. The scent of lilies disappeared, and the only thing the interrogator could smell was rust. Inoichi frowned. That was definitely very different from his previous mindscape. A result of a harsh past. A childhood trauma, maybe? Then, the previous mindscape was the result of the last 1 year with them. But that would mean he was happy here. It made absolutely no sense. If he was a threat, if he wanted to harm Konoha, why would his mindscape look like that? Minato glanced toward his sensei, who also noted the extreme change with narrowed eyes and answered with a shrug. They followed the two blondes without a word, trailing behind them across the long tunnels and passageways until the ankle-deep water suddenly disappeared, and they found themselves in a giant hall filled with shelves, slumping under the enormous amount of books and scrolls, under their captives' uncountable number of old memories, stretching high toward the unreachable ceiling. How on earth? Inoichi felt his jaw drop until it almost hit the ground, and the teen let out a small amused chuckle at the face. It's this much because of the mass amount of shadow clones I use. Their memories are also here somewhere. Inoichi glanced to one of the shelves and spotted one title almost immediately. Shadow Clone, No. 928-156. Naruto spaced his steps and headed to the back of the hall where his newest memories laid. Jiraiya couldn't restrain himself. He suddenly reached out and grabbed one of the smaller scrolls, without reading the title written on the side with obviously childish hands. He opened the scroll, and at that very moment the blonde teen turned back to continue his explanation and noticed just what his white-haired companion had done. The scrolls, the books, and the shelves faded away, and the scene was replaced with a stand full of masks. A very young version of the blonde glanced at the variety with wide eyes, sparkling with childish interest. He couldn't be more than 8. The man behind the counter turned toward him with a smile, but when he spotted the whiskered cheeks, his face suddenly moved into the perfect image of anger, hatred, and disgust. He grabbed the nearest mask, and with a harsh movement, he simply thrust it to the child with enough force to hit him. The child's emotions hit them hard as soon as he landed on the hard soil. The confusion. The disbelief. The anger. The irritation. The despair. And finally, his loneliness. The people around them stopped to watch what was happening, but none of them moved to help the boy. They just stared at the boy's trembling form. The child looked around, his anger rising inside them again. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at me with those eyes. Why are you doing this? A shiver ran down Inoichi's spine by the stairs, but before he could observe the scene, it disappeared in an instant. Jiraiya felt a hand on his joint, and the scene faded away the same way it came into existence. Their eyes met for a moment, but the boy's eyes this time mirrored no emotion. They were staring at him blankly, so uncharacteristically different from his normal cheerful sparkle. He obviously secluded himself from the previous scene. Naruto snapped the scroll from Jiraiya to roll it up and carefully placed it back where he got it, his face still cautiously blank. I let you in by my own will, but there are some things you don't have to know about me. Inoichi made a mental nod. Definitely hard childhood. A deep frown appeared on the senin's face, and he glanced to the side to note the emotionless and cold facade of his student. If there was a slight chance that Torika had told the truth, then the previous scene made no sense. The villagers' stares, their hatred and their disgust. If he was really Minato's son, why would anyone treat him like that? The Toad Sage narrowed his eyes when the puzzle slowly started to come together. His eyes moved to the blonde teen, measuring up from head to toe. The third closing seal on his scroll with the mixed chakra. That one reminded him of the chakra of the glares. His planned assassination at the childbirth. Then Kurama is... Oh, damn it! Jiraiya visibly flinched when Naruto opened his mouth. These are my memories, carefully locked away from you, from Inoichi, and for a short time, also from me. Minato folded his arms in front of his chest, and he turned toward his once-known brother with ice-cold eyes. For how long? Naruto winced and turned away from his father's piercing gaze. Since the kidnapping attempt in Iwa. I regained all of my memories back there. A satisfied snort could be heard from Jiraiya's direction. The veteran shook off his previous shock and braced himself to look as calm as he could. I knew something had changed in you back then. Yes. You were always good at it. You always knew when something was wrong. Minato broke the chat, his voice cold and demanding. Show what you want to show, and don't steal any more of our time. The soft smile immediately melted away from Naruto's face, replaced by an emotionless mask. But Jiraiya could still see the hurt in those blue eyes. As you wish, Hokage-sama. I will answer your every question. Naruto made a slight bow. If you aren't after my life, then who is your target? Naruto stayed in silence for a long, hesitant moment, chewing on his lips slowly. Then, in the end, he let out a sigh. He made a hesitant step toward one of the shelves and gently took out a scroll. The air waved around them, and they found themselves in the middle of a room next to a slightly younger version of their captive, defiantly staring up to a hole in the roof, his teeth clenched together in his anger. Minato's eyes trailed back and observed the man in front of them, a man in a bright orange mask with a swirling symbol and one eye hole. The same mask he spotted during the carnival after the Chunin exam. His body was shrouded by an ebony black cloak with blood-red clouds. Minato's eyes narrowed when he spotted the shining crimson Sharingan through the only eye hole and the wooden restraints around his body. The man's laughter filled the room. Then, he slowly vanished inside a vortex while the blonde boy next to him dropped onto his knees and slammed his fist into the ground. The Hokage narrowed his eyes even more when he finally noticed the wooden cage as the boy wasn't focused only on the masked man. The memory was slowly replaced by the place with the shelves again. Who was he? Minato asked bluntly. Naruto locked his eyes with the ground under his feet while he answered. He called himself by a lot of names. But let's just stick with Tobi. He is an Uchiha. Jiraiya took a step toward the blonde, who only nodded as an answer, and in the next second, Minato's still cold voice reached them. You were fighting with him when you appeared. And now you want to finish what you began. But why would he be there during the childbirth? The blonde boy made a thoughtful face, then shook his head. I wasn't fighting with him. I was fighting with Uchiha Madara. But I have to stop him to stop Madara's plan, because he knows when the seal is going to be the weakest. He wants the fox. Minato's frown deepened while Jiraiya gulped. He was right then. The Toad Summoner made a sly glance and restrained a wince when he noted the cold denial on Minato's features. He could understand it. Really. Minato still couldn't shake off his betrayal and suspicion. He was still too shaken up to put one and one together and think rationally. But still, there was still a slight chance that all of this was just a part of a well-composed attack on Minato's heart. But Jiraiya was sure that they would have their answers with time. However, this fact only unnerved him more. He wasn't sure he could endure the truth. The tiny part of Jiraiya's mind prayed for the second option. That the boy was just an enemy. Because if what he told was true, if he was really Minato's son from the future, then the next years will hold a lot of pain. A snort echoed suddenly, and the Yondaime's face scrunched up into an annoyed grimace. Uchiha Madara is dead, The time traveler shook his head with a confused frown plastered on his face. He must be dead now. At least he should be dead now. After Rin's death, he stopped as the word stuck in his throat. His confused face suddenly twisted into a frustrated grimace. Naruto raised his hands and tore into his blonde locks to channel down some of his waving emotions. It's complicated. But I have to stop Toby before he gets the fox. Naruto let his hands fall to his sides and finally raised his head, and his blue eyes locked with his father's. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes while he observed the flaming blue pools. They seemed so determined, so sincere. The sage let out a sigh and asked a question which had bugged him if his theory was right. What was your previous relation to the Sandaime? The boy didn't answer. Instead, he slowly walked toward another shelf, fetching a second scroll. The world around them faded away once more, and they found themselves inside the familiar office of the Hokage Tower. A slightly older version of Hiruzen was observing a small blonde child in front of him, around 6 or 5, his aging eyes shining with concern. Jiraiya could spot the white streaks in his teacher's once brown hair. The currently faint lines on his face were now deep, and he could also see a few faint liver spots over his face which he was sure he hadn't gotten yet. The projection of the third let out a long breath and put his pipe to the side. Why did you do that? Why did you dye the Inuzuka dogs pink? The child's face hardened and folded his arms in front of his chest, turning away from the Hokage. He stubbornly refused to answer, evidently sulking for a long minute. However, he couldn't get rid of the demanding wise eyes, and with time, he lost his composure under the heavy gaze. The boy finally turned back with a pout, his features the perfect mirror of indifference, but Jiraiya could already see the first tears unsteadily equilibrating on his eyelids. Because one of them called me bad names. He cracked through the lump of his throat, and the first tear lost its balance. Sarutobi let out another weary sigh and rubbed the bridge of his nose, watching as a second tear escaped Naruto's eyelids. Hiruzen gently beckoned, and the blonde child hesitantly obeyed, squeezing his eyes shut when he reached Hiruzen's side, waiting for a punishment, but it didn't come. The Hokage instead wrapped an arm around him and put him onto his lap soothingly. Naruto, pulling pranks on them isn't the right answer. The tears gradually stopped, and the child gathered himself. His hurt was gone, replaced by a defiant pout. But after a long silent minute, it was slowly gone, and the small child nodded in acceptance, wiping his tears and raising his head to look up at the aging leader. Gigi? Yes, Naruto? Hiruzen asked soothingly. I'm sorry. The Hokage slowly shook his head, and a warm, caring smile spread across his wrinkled face, when the small child leaned closer to the Hokage's chest, desperately seeking comfort. Gigi? The small child's faint mumble filled the office again. Yes, Naruto? He repeated patiently. They never talk like that with you. It's because you're the Hokage. It wasn't a question. It was a sour fact slipping from the lips of a 5-year-old child. I'm going to be the next Hokage. And then all of them will look up at me. Jiraiya frowned. Sarutobi wore the Hokage's robe, and the child called him as it. He was in charge again? He made a side glance to Minato, and almost immediately a painful grimace spread across his face and paled, when he realized why the Sandaime was in charge. The named old man opened his mouth, but before he answered the scene faded away, and they were back next to the shelves. Minato slitted his eyes while sheer confusion spread across Inoichi's face. The mind reader made a side glance at their captive, who locked his gaze on the ground. He desperately tried to figure out what the hell was going on, but for now, it was a fail. He could only hope that with time, all of this mess would make sense to him. Naruto was lost, utterly lost in his consuming and empty mind. The sudden fear overwhelmed his thoughts and fogged his brain. He didn't have the courage to look up at the others. He was afraid of what he would find in their eyes. Disbelief? Most likely. Suspicion? For sure. Gradually, he finished his battle with his inner demons and glanced to his father. Defiance. He immediately winced and trailed his eyes toward Inoichi. Utter confusion. Finally, he moved his attention to his once-sensei, and at first, he couldn't really comprehend the expression on his face. With time, he finally realized that his gaze was locked on the almost invisible sad smile on his face. Naruto's tensed muscles instantly relaxed as a wave of hope rushed through him. Show us the rest, please. Jiraiya's baritone cut the silence like a knife, but it wasn't offending. It stroked his shoulders in a soothing manner, reassuring his soul and giving him the power he needed. Naruto didn't answer, only a small, almost invisible smile tugging his lips upward as he nodded. Chapter 29, Breaking Sun. The world around them became black before the small group found themselves on the flat roof of the Hokage Tower. They were in the middle of Konoha surrounded by several people. Indeed, Minato narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing a kunoichi. I know this woman. The people around him started to yell and pointing towards something, and Minato unconsciously followed their fingers and froze at the sight. It was the Hokage monument. His eyes twitched when he spotted the red poop on the second's face, and the 2 colorful swirls on his own stone cheeks, and did he have eyelashes? Ha! He heard an amused snort from Jiraiya. It looks good on you, pansy boy. The loud shout stopped Minato from retorting. Stop right there! You'll pay for this! Shut up, you morons! I can do whatever I want because I'm the awesome, one and only, Uzumaki Naruto! Minato finally spotted an orange spot shouting back, a small child, maybe 12, with blonde locks. The blood in his veins suddenly froze when a man stepped through him. The man was dressed in Konoha's traditional green chunin vest, complete with the Uzumaki swirl on his back. Minato heard another set of footsteps, and the old leader's familiar and irritated murmur was muttering behind him. He didn't have to turn around. A version of Sarutobi stopped next to him a moment later, looking up at the vandalized monument in what could only be described as the epitome of frustration. The same Sandaime, however, had more wrinkles and liver spots on his face, and white hair. Uzumaki Naruto! What the hell are you doing during class time? The chunin shouted in front of him, but the scene suddenly gave way to inky blackness. 3 young genin were sitting on a rooftop with shiny new Hittite, a black-haired boy, a blonde one, and a young pink-haired girl. Sakura, the Hokage mused. The one whose older version he had already seen. His eyes drifted to the last person, and he immediately took a step back and sucked in a breath. It's your turn to introduce yourselves now. The blonde child shouted his name again, then began to mumble about ramen, but Minato fixed his eyes on the older man, on the gravity-defying spiky silver hair, the unmistakable dark blue mask on his face, and the Hittite carefully hiding his left eye. My dream is to surpass the Hokage and have the people of this village acknowledge my existence. Existence? Hokage? What is that child talking about? The words slipped out from Minato's lips without his awareness. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed as he noted his former student's confused expression. He glanced back at the memory of the still rambling boy with a sad, understanding smile on his face. Now he understood his longing. The pranks. All he did was for attention. The image blurred and blacked out again. They were in a clearing now next to 3 poles, the blonde child secured to the middle one. The previous man who looked like Kakashi stood in the middle. Those who break the rules of the ninja world are trash. But you know what? Those who don't take care of their comrades are lower than trash. The movement of his mask and the way his eyes were crinkling with genuine good humor hinted at the wide and proud smile on his face. All of you pass. Starting tomorrow, Team 7 will begin its duties in Konoha. Minato's heart drummed against his ribs like it wanted to break free from his chest, but he didn't have the time to think about it. Short scenes started to appear in front of his eyes, and alien emotions forced their way into his soul. The blonde child faced a masked hunter Nin in the middle of thick fog. Fear. A young black-haired girl or boy smiled at him in the next one. Care. A porcelain mask shattered. Betrayal. The newly blooded Team 7 stood in front of 2 fresh graves. Determination. The older Kakashi handed them an application form for the next Chunin exam. Excitement. The blonde slammed his palm to a desk, declaring that he would become Hokage even if he had to stay a genin forever. Courage. He jumped between the Uchiha and a giant snake. The urge to protect. Next, he was faced with an Inuzuka in a familiar battle ring. The faces of the spectators were riddled with doubt and condescension. Defiance. The scenes finally slowed down, and they found themselves in a hospital room. 3 boys were facing each other. One of them was obviously a young Nara, the others being the blonde boy and another with short, spiky, auburn hair and deep black rings around his eyes. The redhead carried an enormous gourd on his back, and the kanji love was carved into the pale skin of his forehead. Minato frowned when the child's eyes sparkled with obvious insanity, his voice shaking with emotion while he declared that his mother would have their blood. Sand started to flow out from the gourd on his back, threateningly hovering around the kids. The Hokage listened, horrified, as the child told his story, that his father, the Kazekage, tried to assassinate him countless times, that he had a real monster inside him. Minato's mind wandered for a second. The seal. Their trip to Suna with Toriku. Toriku's concern about the baby. It couldn't be. Jiraiya just smiled proudly when the boy stood up for his comrade, unknowing of his student's thoughts. The scene changed again. The blonde boy was now yelling and pointing a finger at a white-haired man. Who the hell are you? Minato couldn't restrain the smug smile on his face when he spotted the familiar wooden fence of Konoha's hot spring. Mount Myaboku's holy master, also known as the Great Toad Sannin. Remember it! Minato stumbled forward when something shoved him from behind. He made a side glance at the younger version of the very same man, his eyes wide and his lips trembling and slightly opened. Now it was Jiraiya's turn to be confused. The kid didn't know him? Why didn't he know his godfather? What the hell happened? I don't care! You knocked out my teacher, and even if he was just a closet pervert, he was supposed to teach me tons of stuff. I have to become stronger for the Chunin exams. Take responsibility, and help me with my training. I hate rude and disrespectful brats. And I don't like men. The oh-so-familiar pout was on the memory's face in an instant as he turned away from the rude brat. But the boy didn't let him down easily. A sly, foxy grin spread across his face. Sexy no jutsu! Minato watched with a twitch in his eye as the older version of his sensei slobbered at the sight, and almost immediately accepted the request to train the blonde child. However, he could also hear as his own version snorted in amusement. He obviously shook off his previous shock thanks to the sight of the nude girl. His sensei giggled perversely as the naked girl shook her bare hip in a sensual manner. New images surfaced with increased speed until they slowed down once more. They were now in the middle of an unfamiliar battle ring facing with an older boy with a Byakugan. A battle between the great desert monster and Gamabunta, but it slowed down until two children were lying on the ground, bruised, bloody. For a moment things were quiet, then without warning everything went black. And cold. It was raining, Minato realized after a minute as he stared at the tomb in front of him. The air around them was heavy and thick with sadness and sorrow. The emotion radiated. He fixed his eyes on the picture of his predecessor tidily placed in the middle of a new monument. He finally tore his gaze away to look to his side where the small blonde child was standing, still wounded, likely from his previous battle with the redhead. At least he was bandaged. A smaller child in front of the blonde started to sob, and the Chunin from the first scene crouched down and locked him in a tight embrace. Someone behind his back whispered vengeance on Orochimaru for killing the third. The scene changed once more, the funeral replaced by the untidy walls of a bar. The village hidden in the leaf has issued a request for you to be the fifth Hokage. Minato narrowed his eyes, and a heavy gasp echoed from his sensei's direction. They waited apprehensively for the familiar blonde woman to finally give her answer. The older Jiraiya, however, was under no such restriction. So, Tsunade? Will you answer the call of our village? As if to belittle the severity of the request, the woman's delicate features scrunched up in an annoyed grimace. I decline. What the hell? The blonde-haired kid was beside himself, shouting toward Tsunade, but the woman ignored him. She, instead, turned toward the frowning Sannin and jerked a finger at the boy. Who's the kid? My new apprentice Uzumaki Naruto. The sage answered, a small, proud smile tugging at his lips, but the restrained expression would be only recognizable to his own younger version. Too bad his attention was glued on Tsunade, watching how she shifted in her seat. Her chest rose and fell. He could sense the sweet smell he missed so much, but it was most likely from his own memories. Finally, with an inhuman willpower, he restrained his consciousness back to the scene. Jiraiya, he's even worse than your last one. In terms of looks, speech, and intelligence. Jiraiya let out a loud laugh next to Minato, but the Hokage didn't react at all. There was no annoyed grunt, no twitch, nothing as he supposed it would be. With a heavy sigh, he turned back to the scene. What's that supposed to mean? Jiraiya's older version shrugged. It's tough for anyone to be compared to the Yondaime. He was the absolute best in the shinobi arts. But even with that, the fourth died quickly. She mumbled softly. He gave up his life for his village just like Sarutobi. Her features hardened with disgust. Being Hokage is a shit. No one but a fool would do it. The young boy's body tensed from the confined emotions, but he exploded in the next moment. He jumped over the table, his anger rising, and his muscles viciously trembled from the overwhelming feelings that were also washing over them. Rage. Disbelief. I won't forgive anyone who badmouths the old man or the Yondaime. Minato lost his composure at that. He stepped backwards, bumping into Jiraiya who just stood there, his face blank like white paper but his eyes carefully observant with a hard edge. Minato's formerly empty mind swelled with disturbing thoughts. His soul bounced between denial and acceptance with insane speed, the process practically dizzying. If I died. If he is why does he call me Yondaime? Why doesn't he call me Dad? As a last resort, he turned to face Inoichi's wide eyes and pale face. The veteran interrogator locked his eyes with Minato's and slowly shook his head. Though, those are real memories, Minato. You can feel the emotions even behind my mind barrier. Those are real. Minato's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. Funny. That was also Inoichi's first thought after the first scene at the top of the Hokage's office, and he had immediately tried to look after signs of fabrication, but he found none. The boy's emotions were so overwhelming, so clear that they even leaked through his protective jutsu. There was no chance those were fabricated. The environment, the small details, Shikaka's aged image, even down to the same small crack Inoichi knew was there on the corner of the Hokage tower. They were too perfect. And the boy wasn't fighting. The connection was stable, and the flow was smooth and continuous as he chose the memories to appear. Suddenly, they found themselves in the middle of a battle. Minato spotted Orochimaru and the older Jiraiya and also the terrified Tsunade in the middle of a pool of blood. The blonde kid slumped to the ground in front of the terrified Sannin, the scene blinking black as the kid was on the verge of unconsciousness. They could hear Tsunade's voice echoing around them, yelling at the kid to not die, to not give up. In the end, the world around them became clear once more, but only for a fraction of a second as the kid reached out for the well-known crystal necklace. They watched as Tsunade gently put the necklace around his neck, the voices around them becoming clear, then muffling again from time to time as the kid came in and out of consciousness. They listened to the wavering conversation in the background between the three Sannin. They listened as Tsunade declared her position as the Godaime Hokage. Those were the last words they could hear before the boy's body gave up the fight and drifted into unconsciousness. Another series of short images started to flash in front of their eyes, short memories of fights, spars, pictures of a smiling Jiraiya while walking next to each other in the streets of distant towns. The images finally slowed down. A group of Konoha shinobi stood in front of a three-person squad next to the enormous sandstone walls of Suna. Jiraiya glanced around and grimaced when he spotted the older green beast in the background, babbling loudly about the flames of youth, a weary Kakashi seated and not to mention suffering on his back. The blonde boy stepped forward to face with the same boy from before. However, both of them looked older by at least 2 or 3 years. Soft sand started to flow, and raised the hand of the blonde boy to meet with his companion for a friendly shake. Minato narrowed his eyes as he observed the 3 Suna shinobi. Someone yelled from the background, and a jounin ran out from the entrance, the same, but older version of the man who escorted them all around the village when they were there together with Toraku. Kazekage-sama! I'm sorry, but the village council is requesting your immediate presence. The auburn-haired boy nodded, but his gaze was still locked on the softly smiling blonde. Uzumaki Naruto. Thank you. The named Kage made a real, deep and respectful bow toward the teen, who scratched his flushing cheeks in embarrassment. Jiraiya let his mouth hang open. A Kage bowing to a Konoha shinobi? No. To Naruto. To his godson. A wide and proud grin spread across his face. Gaara, note that I secured an advance favor from you when I'm the Hokage, after Tsunade-bachan finally admits that she's too old. A soft smile. When the time comes, I'll give you that favor, Uzumaki Naruto. You have my word. The scene was replaced with the Hokage's office, crowded with people with worried looks on their faces and, toads? Jiraiya raised his eyebrow and took a step forward. His eyes were glued on the small old toad. Minato's gaze wandered toward Tsunade sitting behind the table, her chin resting on her folded fingers. Her eyes were dark and haunted, missing the sparkle he remembered and loved so much. She looked like she had just after Dan and Nawaki's deaths. Pa suddenly turned toward the kid dressed in the vibrant orange jumpsuit. So this boy here is Jiraiya-chan's pupil? A frown appeared on the teen's face, who couldn't be more than 16, maybe a half head shorter than the blonde whose mind they were currently occupying. Chan? Who does this guy think he is, calling Ero-sen-in-chan? The named pervert silently mouthed his nickname, watching with unfolding annoyance as the ancient old toad burst out in a barking laughter. I said watch your mouth. He is Jiraiya's teacher. Tsunade snapped, but the old toad's laughter echoed inside the office freely for a long time. However, it couldn't wash away the tension of the room. All right, old toad. What did you want to tell me? Naruto asked, with an impatient tone, his eyes glued on the small figure. Fukasaku instantly shut his mouth, and the thick atmosphere renewed with increased force, choking every attendant as the toad raised his eyes toward the blonde boy. Where do I start? He mused with a low whisper. Fukasaku's eyes drifted to the side for a long moment, his face saddened. Finally, he released the suffocating stillness with a drawn-out sigh. Jiraiya-chan was killed in battle. The room went silent as the temperature just seemed to drop. Alien emotions overwhelmed them, pushing their own feelings to the side. First the denial, then the emptiness, and finally the sorrow, and the overwhelming rage. The scene shifted again, and to their biggest surprise they found themselves on the head of a familiar enormous toad. Gamabunta shifted inside the dense smoke and dust, Nothing could be seen around them. Only the boy's silhouette was sharp as he proudly stood on a smaller toad, his scarlet coat with black flame patterns wildly flipping under the enormous scroll that was secured on his back. The blonde looked around, his confusion immediately reaching them. "Where are we? Where is the enemy?" boomed Gamabunta with confusion. A new toad hopped next to Naruto, and Pa instantly turned toward his wife. "I thought I told you to summon us to Konoha. Take a closer look. This is Konoha. The Akatsuki members who killed Jiraiya-chan are here." The visitors froze, desperately waiting for the dust to slowly fade away. The silhouette of the enormous Hokage monument slowly evolved behind the smoke, the fifth head of Tsunade boldly sculpted at the end. Devastating fury replaced the previous confusion in their hearts as the boys' emotions switched. Minato detachedly observed the enormous crater where the village center should have been. Everything was gone. Konoha was wiped from the surface of the earth. From the corner of his eye, Minato saw movement on the ground, and he finally turned his head to face with the memory again. 6 people stood in the middle of the crater, their bodies shrouded by ink-black cloaks with crimson clouds. The boy and Tsunade were facing them. One of the cloaked men rushed toward Tsunade, but the blonde teen simply crushed him to pieces with one single punch. Minato could hear a muffled thud, and he averted his gaze from the fight to glance at Jiraiya, who slumped to his knees on the ground, his eyes and mouth wide open in his amazement. That is... He's using Senjutsu! And he's in perfect sage mode! Damn, my godson is good! Minato narrowed his eyes and shut his mouth with an audible knock as his teeth almost painfully clenched together. His hands curved into fists, and his fingernails dug into the soft flesh of his palm, leaving small, moon-shaped bays when he finally released them as a new wave of emotions washed through him. The boy's almost inaudible plea stabbed his eardrums. "Is Kakashi-sensei away on a mission outside the village?" The emotions kicked them hard on the head, the fading hope suddenly replaced by sorrow when he received no answer. "I see." The boy finally pushed out through his clenched teeth. The sudden flinch of despair immediately reverted back to raising anger, bubbling inside their veins, melting their own coherent thoughts as the fury overwhelmed their every sense. The visitors locked their eyes on the enormous and epic battle in front of their feet. Minato watched in disbelief and in silent awe as the teenager attacked with a Rasengan. And not just one or normal ones. Giant ones the size of a house. Then he heard it. The skirt of the razor-sharp wind chakra mixed perfectly into the Rasengan. His unfinished technique used and perfected by a teenage boy. A small amount of irritation rose inside his chest when the realization hit him hard. He tricked me. He just pranked me when I taught him the Rasengan. His azure eyes wandered again toward the Hokage monument until he finally turned to the center again, where the young boy was captured by the last person in the black coat with red clouds, pinning him down to the ground. "Peace? Justice?" the blonde repeated with a hushed tone in disbelief, but his face suddenly hardened, throwing his sanity to the edge. "My Shisho! My sensei! My friends! My village! How can you say that when you've destroyed them all?" He screamed out with all his building fury in the hope that even if he couldn't hurt the person in front of him, maybe his words would do it for him. Then, the rage suddenly stopped and switched with misery as the man started talking and Jiraiya uncontrollably took more and more steps until he was an inch from the pierced man, his eyes glued on the features. Yahiko. It's Yahiko. But he died. They all died." The once rushing adrenaline in Naruto's pounding heart and veins faded the throbbing pain into a dull buzz, slowly disappearing from his system. The man impassively observed the teen before his demanding voice stabbed through the thick silence. "How would you face this hatred in order to build peace? Let me have your answer." A new memory evolved in their minds, a memory inside the memory. Jiraiya sitting on the stairs of a wooden house talking about peace, about the spreading hatred, leaving his legacy to a 13-year-old boy. "I don't know," the boy mumbled faintly. A Hyuga girl hurled into the fight and fell soon by Yahiko's hands. Their mind blacked out for a long moment until an enormous rush of sheer, animalistic rage shook them back to the memory. However, their vision was blurred by the red fog. A hushed, dull voice echoed back and forth between them. "Do you hate me now?" And this triggered something. Jiraiya's mind was suddenly filled with emotions which weren't his. These was the boy's emotions. They were no longer witnessing the memories, they were living them. Struggling between animalistic rage, pain, confusion, pleading for an answer, begging for help, then finally, inhuman despair. The feeling of the deepest grief he had ever felt. The scene changed again. They were now inside a familiar sewer, the mindscape of the boy who was kneeling on top of the water, curled up into a tight ball in the middle, clenching his head. The hopelessness increased to an unbearable level, while deep, alien murmurs filled the air around them, tempting them with the offer of redemption. freeing him from his burden, his struggle, his grief. The emotions were so overwhelming and forceful that Minato had to restrain himself from stepping closer to the bars by sinking his nails into his palms. His mind screamed and begged to give up, to let it go, to offer up his soul and body, anything to stop the unbearable pain. Inoichi took a shaky step toward the bars, his will overpowered by the temptation and the boy's emotions, and he would have gone further if Jiraiya hadn't taken a hold of his arm. However, there was no one who could help the boy. Gradually, he gave up. The water around him blackened when a seal pattern on his exposed stomach melted away. He emotionlessly limped toward the giant bars of a cage, but it was only the hollow shell of the once cheerful boy. His hand slowly rose toward an enormous paper marked with one single kanji, seal. A shiver crawled up Minato's spine as one word echoed inside his mind, Jinchuriki. The Hokage furiously oscillated on the thin verge of acceptance and the redeeming denial. His balance was unsteady, and an invisible power tugged him further toward the rejection. And he let it. Because if he would accept what the boy had said, he would also accept what he had done to his son, shoving his own blood into misery, into a lifetime of pain and grief. Giving his own flesh a burden no one should carry. A conversation forced itself into his weary brain together with the sudden shame and regret about something he hadn't even done. Not yet, anyway. I understand your point, and it is the same for me. Using a child to create a Jinchuriki is shocking for me also. I would never do that willingly. You will do it without a second thought. I won't. Maybe you will face something that doesn't leave you any other choice. If that time comes, you will do it without hesitation. You are the same as the Kazekage in more ways than one. If it's about Konoha, you will throw away your life with a smile on your face. I will cross that bridge if I reach it. But with my current knowledge, I wouldn't do that. If a time like that comes, you won't have to make that choice. You'll have a family to look after. I won't let you die. Suddenly, a man appeared and grabbed the hand which was about to tear away the last restraint of the bijou. Minato stared in total disbelief at his own reflection, his own mirror image, not even a year older than his current self. Even the pouch on his leg seemed brand new, the pouch with the small embroidery cushion it gave him after their wedding, and he had shown no one. It laid inside his cupboard, tucked into the red paper which still smelled like vanilla. Like Kushina. The seal is set so that if the 8 tails are released, I'll appear within your consciousness. I didn't want that to happen. I never wanted to see you again, Kyubi. Minato's chest tightened dangerously, his mind frozen by the last word. He wanted to shout at his own mirror image to shut up, to stop, to not say anything more. However, it continued, his voice kind and excited. But I looked forward to seeing how my son had grown. Naruto. The suffocating despair and anger suddenly disappeared, and confusion replaced the previous emotions as the teen raised his eyes to finally meet with his saviors. He stared at the man, his mouth opening and closing until he was finally able to press out the word he was looking for. You are the Yondaime. Why does the Yondaime know my name? Well, I mean, I gave you your name. You're my son after all. Son? Like I said, you're my son. I guess Sandaime never told you. Minato watched his own self, heard his own voice, and saw his own gestures with wide eyes. He could even smell his own scent before the scene changed again. The sewer with the furious bijou behind the bars disappeared, and they stood in the middle of a yellowish void. His mirror image's eyes gradually saddened as he silently watched the boy in front of him like he also couldn't believe to his eyes. His lips were unsteadily parting and closing, desperately trying to find the right words, his whole composure screaming about excitement. Finally he braced himself and murmured into the void. Forgive me, Naruto. Minato flinched at his own pleading voice, but his eyes flung toward the boy as a new emotion flared. Anger. Dad? The boy murmured with a low tone, but it still held a strange, warning edge. And indeed. In the next blink, they all know why. The Hokage winced as the young boy sent a hard punch to his mirror image's stomach, forcing out every last bit of air from his lungs. Why did you seal the damn Kyubi in your own son? Do you know how tough it's been living with that? The mixture of reversed emotions raced inside his head, anger, betrayal, even hatred. Then, suddenly forgiveness and happiness, then disbelief, denial, and in the end, overwhelming joy. Finally, the boy broke down in front of them from the enormous pressure and the roller coaster of emotions. His mirror image first did nothing to comfort the boy. He stood there lost in his own perplexity, lost what to do to soothe his broken son, until he finally found his voice. Naruto, how old are you now? 16. The teen sobbed into his sleeve while he tried to get rid of the evidence of his breakdown. I've caused you a lot of pain, Naruto. I'm sorry. I've caused you nothing but grief. Some father I am. All I can do is apologize. Minato stared at his mirror image's face as the emotions fell. The care. The shame. Pride and love. It's okay. I can deal. I am the Yondaime's son after all. Minato finally tore his gaze from the scene and unsteadily glanced to the side to face with his two companions watching him, Inoichi with wide and shocked eyes while Jiraiya watched his every action, every twitch of his muscles, with a sad smile. The scene switched again, the roller coaster of emotions finally dying down, and only sheer determination flooded their minds. The blonde man was facing with another redhead's surreal form. There's no such thing as real peace. Don't tell me this. Just let me capture you, Kyuubi. Then I'll break this curse. If there's such thing as peace, I'll find it. I won't give up. That is Sensei's. Jiraiya took a step forward, his eyes widening in shock. Nah, Nagato. Conan. The three visitors were hanging on the conversation between the two men for long minutes. It was with awe in the case of Jiraiya and confusion and curiosity with Inoichi. With Minato? It was nothing. He got rid of his emotions, tossing them into a box and burying them in a deep pit of his mind. The redhead finally made his decision. I will believe in you, Uzumaki Naruto. There is still time to save those I killed when I came to Konoha. It's the least I can do. The scene changed again. The people of Konoha cheered and yelled around the blonde boy, tapping him, embarrassing him and tossing him into the air. Familiar faces could be seen everywhere. Minato's eyes slipped through Jiraiya's wide and obviously proud grin to spot the older version of Inoichi in the back rows standing together with Naro Shikaku, and to his biggest surprise Kakashi hopped down next to him, his mostly calm and uninterested visible eye burning with sheer pride. Minato almost missed the soft murmur behind the mask. I hope, Sensei, you are watching him from up there. Minato desperately shook his head. A part of his mind screamed for acceptance. But that would mean he had failed. He failed to protect Kushina. He failed to protect Naruto. A tiny, selfish part of his mind gave a final push, and he fell over the line he had previously been balancing. He sank into the deepest abyss of the redeeming denial. And for the first time in his life, Minato had to admit with a sour smile that he was a coward. The fearless Yondaime Hokage averted his eyes from the scene to observe a small green leaf at his feet. The scene finally disappeared, and the four men found themselves again inside the giant hall with the enormous quantity of scrolls. Minato didn't avert his gaze from the floor despite the fact that the leaf had already disappeared. Nor did Naruto look up at his father. Their eyes were locked on their own feet, not daring to raise their heads and met each other's eyes. The boy's weak voice stabbed the silence. The future from this point. I don't think you want to see that. Naruto finally looked up but still didn't meet with anyone's eyes, nor did he speak. It was Inoichi who broke the silence with his cracking and weary voice. Who was the blonde girl? Naruto glanced toward Inoichi with a sad smile on his face. The hall disappeared, and they found themselves on the streets of Konoha. A younger version of the blonde boy, maybe in his 15s, walked side by side with the pink-haired Kunoichi from that memory while they reached their destination and stepped inside the familiar flower shop. The blonde girl behind the counter flung her head toward them with a wide smile, her long ponytail gracefully following her head's movement. Hey! Naruto Baka! Forehead girl! A furious snort left the pink-haired Kunoichi before she stamped toward the still grinning girl. Only Naruto's arms around her waist restrained the pinkette from punching the girl behind the counter. Ino! What's with you? Do you want to kill yourself? Inoichi's throat squeezed even as he had already known the answer to his question. His eyes were locked on the features of the girl, her brilliant blue eyes, her platinum hair. She had the same wide and cheeky smile as her mother. He was so blind. He was so utterly blind. Hey, dead last. I don't need your advice. The blonde teen froze, his eyes narrowed and he simply let go of the struggling pink-haired Kunoichi to answer to the offense. A small fight started immediately between the two girls, and after one more poke, the blonde boy also started to shout. A new voice echoed inside the small shop, freezing them in their motion. It was maybe older and raspier, but it definitely belonged to the almost mirror image of Yamanaka Inoichi, who just stepped inside the small shop. Yamanaka Ino! What the hell is going on here? The blonde girl flung her head to the side to meet with her father's stern and piercing gaze. We were just talking. The shinobi let out a weary sigh and rubbed his temples. Ino. Behave! You are sometimes just like your mother. But Dad! Inoichi winced, but his expression slowly softened to a proud, fatherly smile. She will be strong, she will surpass him and all the previous generations. No buts, young lady! The image slowly faded away once again, revealing the blonde teen who hadn't moved from his spot. Jiraiya cleared his throat to gain Naruto's attention. Can we see Kurama? The teen obediently turned his head to glance up to his godfather. His eyes slightly widened, and his tense muscles relaxed when he noted the soft smile on his face. An equally small smile appeared on Naruto's face as he beckoned them to follow. He led the small team to the end of the hall. Minato followed them like a robot, his azure eyes wandering toward a small drawer in the end, unconsciously reading the titles of the scrolls. Techniques he'd never seen, techniques Toriku had never used. Techniques all developed from the Rasengan. A small amount of pride started to rise inside his chest, but he immediately pushed it back to where it came from. The Hokage slowly shook his head and continued following the boy automatically without a word until they reached the shore of a large patch with soft green grass, tenderly swinging together with the gracious branches of the osier trees. Inoichi's mind unconsciously started to observe the look of his original mindscape to further analyze it. Thick bushes of ivy grew on the pipes and the concrete walls, which were spotted with fungus at the cracks, and he also could spot some thuja here and there covering the harsh environment, but all of these were shrouded by the giant osier trees and cypresses. This was the real consciousness of the boy. No. Naruto. Important bonds and friendships that slowly overgrew the evidence of the harsh childhood, the loneliness of it, but it was also shrouded by grief. A frown sat on the interrogator's face. His eyes traveled down to his feet, where he noted that they weren't standing on grass as he first thought. The meadow was made from white clovers. Promises. The green field was spotted with several flowers here and there, dandelions, the symbols of faithfulness and happiness, crocuses as the sign of the cheerfulness, daisies which meant innocence, purity, faith, cheer, simplicity. But all of those were mostly in front of the background in a straight order and only here and there mixed into the other parts of the mindscape. And that meant they were dissembling. A mask of happiness the boy wore before. Inoichi narrowed his eyes once again, collecting his confused thoughts. But the previous and the obviously new mindscape also contains all of those, but not in the same straight lines. They had grown in a natural and chaotic way. Those weren't a mask. The boy was really happy here. He was really the easygoing and always smiling cheerful blonde boy. The teen cleared his throat, kicking Inoichi from his thoughts, and stepped aside to fold his arms in front of his chest, obviously waiting for something to happen. Soft ruffling could be heard behind the giant trees, and the three men couldn't help the unconscious step they made backward when the enormous fox rose from behind the giant trees. Minato narrowed his eyes, looking for the oversized cage and the bars. A wide, cunning grin spread across the fox's face as he slowly and viciously stepped forward. Inoichi uncontrollably started to shake with fear. Kurama took one more step and leaned his enormous head toward the small group, resting the giant, razor-sharp canines only meters from them. The veteran interrogator flinched one more step backward from the giant canine, fighting with his every nerve against his instinct to flee from the mindscape, which would cause everyone else to be forced out from the kid's mind also. Their projected bodies suddenly blurred for a second as Inoichi almost lost his grip on the connection, but with willpower above a normal human, he braced himself, and their figures become normal again. A smirk appeared on the fox's face, raising the tension to an unbearable level. The muscles in the visitors' bodies tensed until the breaking point, their bodies ready to attack or flee. Most likely flee. The strain reached a level where Naruto thought he could simply reach out and touch it. The enormous red eyes moved toward the Hokage, locking with his blue pools for a long and heavy moment before the fox smirked. Long time no see, Namikaze Minato. At least personally. Jiraiya slowly opened his mouth while his eyes desperately ran through the environment, looking for an escape if it became necessary, forgetting that this wasn't real. One thing caught his attention, forcing him to make an unconscious step backward. Where is the seal? A chuckle bubbled out from the fox while he raised his giant paw and slowly straightened himself. A wet tongue ran through a razor-sharp claw threateningly, which was soon placed in front of the small group slowly and menacingly, almost touching Jiraiya and passing only a centimeter from Minato's leg, ruffling the textile of his coat. There is no more a seal. It's only me and you. A wide and satisfied smirk appeared on his face, when Inoichi took a sudden step backward and hit the ground, his mouth falling open and his eyes widening by the horror, his body uncontrollably shaking while the rest of the visitors except Minato immediately tensed. He was staring up to the fox with an emotionless face. It was me all this time. I took over his body a long time ago, you mortal fools! It broke off into harsh, mocking barks of laughter. Kurama! Stop fooling around! The blonde teen's voice was harsh and came back with an echo. However, it held the tone of a father scolding his son after he misbehaved. What? It was fun. You have to admit. I already told you, you got no sense of humor. Geez, grow up. An irritated snort left his giant mouth. Annoyed red orbs flung toward the blonde teen, who rolled his eyes in response. Like you got any right to speak, brat. Don't call me brat. Naruto paused, then suddenly barked out in frustration. Flea bag. Enormous red orbs flashed with anger. Kurama narrowed his eyes while he leaned close to the teen, his shining black nose only centimeters from his face. Ramen freak. He spat out, his breath grabbing the boy's form and shaking it. Naruto's eyes dangerously narrowed by the insult. Then, a grin appeared on his face which sent a shiver down Jiraiya's spine. It wasn't a happy grin. It was a dangerous grin, absolutely out of place on the face of the blonde boy. Repeat it if you dare. Amen freak. Plus, you are an immature shrimp. Jerk. Idiot. Naruto slitted his eyes and sucked in a long breath before he let out his gathering frustration. You are a megalomaniac, egotistical furball with fleas who can lick his own butt. A furious snort left the fox's mouth, the wind of his breath dangerously grabbing Naruto's clothes and hair, but he stood still, glaring daggers to those enormous crimson orbs. You insolent brat! I am the great Kyuubi no Kitsune! Without me, you would be long dead! Without me, you would be only a useless, hairless monkey! You weren't even able to sense Jiraiya back then in the bar. Naruto suddenly froze. You knew Jiraiya was there. You purposefully spoke to me like that. Of course I did it on purpose. Why the hell would I speak with you by a clone if I can do it in your mindscape? But you need help. You played this game alone far too long. Don't bear everything alone or you will lose yourself. Naruto tilted his head to the side, eyeing his furry companion for a long silent minute, his eyes dangerously slitted, but after the silent fight, he let out a long and weary sigh and nodded. I'm sorry, Naruto murmured softly. Kurama straightened himself, and a wide grin appeared on his face from the small victory, sending shivers down everyone else's backs besides Naruto, who moved next to the giant paw and tapped his fur, eyeing the shocked group in front of his eyes. Everything looked so otherworldly. Their argument, their small bickering with Kurama. But at least it eased away some of his tension, and he was grateful for it. We teamed up and became partners. I am no longer his prisoner, and there is no longer any need for the seal. The brat over here earned my full respect, even if he is an idiotic, loud-mouthed monkey who screws up everything. Hey! I'm right here! I can hear you! Kurama simply ignored his presence, his eyes still glued on the leader of the village. Do you still think Naruto lied to you, Namikaze Minato? You know very well who my previous vessel was. Or who is now, it depends how we think about our situation. Or should I inform also Inoichi? But I think he already figured it out. Minato narrowed his eyes dangerously, his hands squeezing into fists. I don't believe you. Kurama opened his mouth to argue but suddenly stiffened and shut it when a new presence strolled into the scene. It stopped at Naruto's side and leaned closer. See? I told you he wouldn't believe. You won't be able to convince him. Naruto's hands curved up into fists, his lips pressing into a thin line. The entity nodded in satisfaction and passed his counterpart. But his previous expression melted into a deep, troubled frown on his face as soon he turned his back and walked toward the nearest tree, sinking down with a worried sigh. Kurama's attention flickered back to the group, his eyes narrowing as his gaze inadvertently landed on Inoichi's frowning and uneasy face. The mind reader's eyes were glued on the same spot Naruto's counterpart had chosen to sit. No. Not exactly on him, but close. The Yamanaka could feel the other's flickering presence. You aren't the Kyuubi. All of this is just part of your illusion, Minato stated with a cold edge. Red eyes flickered back to Minato while 9 enormous tails slowly started to swing behind his form like they were living a life separate from the fox's body. The fox finally disregarded the still frowning blonde copy and let a small trail of glowing red, demonic chakra seep in Minato's direction. The glowing energy wrapped around his ankle only for a second, just long enough to make direct contact so that the fourth would feel it, before it retreated. Oh, so you are denying it? It's hard to accept the truth, isn't it? Which part is harder to accept? That Naruto here is your son from the future, or that you made a Jinchuriki from your own son? He didn't show you everything. He wanted to spare you from a part of his memories, but I'm not that soft. He lived the first 12 years of his life alone, feared, hated, ignored and shunned by your beloved Konoha. Guilt darkened Minato's azure eyes several shades, dimming the sparkle in it for a moment. Kurama! Stop it! Please! But Kurama ignored Naruto's plea. Minato had to know. He had to know what was waiting for him, what he had done. No more lies. No more secrecy. Just the naked truth. He mercilessly continued for his sake. Namikaze Minato. I was finally free, and then, you came and ruined everything. I hated you for long years because of what you had done to me while that brat over here suffered from your decision, by the burden you had put on his shoulders. But he was strong, and he never gave up. The village's pariah became a hero, even your successor. Kurama paused, letting the words sink in. But you made the right choice. The world you live in will soon fade away, and Naruto is able to stop its destruction. He is the one who can bring peace to your world. He is the destined child of prophecy. Kurama turned his head toward Naruto, who suddenly found something very interesting on the green grass, his face burning a bright red tone in his embarrassment. Kurama had never praised him. Never ever. And he continued. Naruto has a power that is greater than yours or even my own. He's got the power to change people around him for the better. He managed to turn his enemies into allies. He managed back then to unite the shinobi nations, and he managed to turn an ancient, old, furious fox demon blinded by hatred into something else. He earned my full respect and my friendship. Naruto's head unconsciously traveled toward a lonely osier tree where his mirror image sat, his arms folded in front of his chest, and his face was the perfect picture of worry. His eyes were defiantly locked on Naruto, not releasing him even for a second to blink. The lines on his forehead were deep from his scowl. Kurama narrowed his eyes, as he traced back Naruto's slightly turned head. His eyes widened, and he licked his suddenly dry lips. Gears turned, and he almost faltered, ruining his previous perfect performance. But the fox grabbed himself in the last second. You've known about him the whole time, haven't you, Naruto? Naruto's shoulders stiffened under Kurama's searching gaze. But they relaxed as he slowly nodded and released his sight from the tree to concentrate on his father's still figure, not daring to look up at his never-missing companion. I do. It's not a big deal. You were overreacting. He is as much a part of me as you. The ancient, old Bija held his gaze on the golden crown before he shook his head. His lips turned upward into a small smile before he also glanced back at the still indifferent Minato. The fox eyed the defiant leader for a long minute, but his eyes softened and drifted back to his jailer. Even after almost 18 years, he still amazes me. He can still teach me new things about humanity. He surpassed you a long time ago, Minato. You can be proud of your son. Because I am proud of him. Naruto. Tell them everything. With this last simple statement, Kurama simply turned around and walked back behind the trees. Jiraiya's eyes widened with disbelief when realization hit him. The memory. Konoha was gone, and you said that the future became darker? What did you mean? Naruto finally moved his eyes to meet with Jiraiya's, hesitantly observing his clenched jaw while he was musing how the hell he would say it. In the end, he didn't beat around the bush. War, sensei. The fourth great shinobi war. The world will face something which will bring disaster to the ninja world. Madara's plan was to collect all the bijou and become the Jubi's Jinchuriki. He made the first step. He unleashed the 10-tailed beast on the shinobi world, but he failed to become its jailer. He slowly shook his head. Even the allied shinobi forces won't stand a chance against him. 80,000 ninja will fall, together with countless civilians. Even the joint power of the 5 Kage won't stand a chance against that thing. Tsunade Bacon was the third who fell. Byakuzen saved my life by sacrificing his own. My comrades. Naruto stayed in silence for long, hesitant seconds, tossing his emotions to the side. Then, Chuchikage Jiji, the Mizukage, the Raikage and Gaara will fall together with Suna. The boy let out a shaky sigh, and his hand ran through his golden locks. Sorrow fogged his eyes, darkening his azure blue orbs into a royal blue shade, and somehow the 18-year-old boy seemed to be older by at least a decade. Everything will start with my birth and with Dad's and Mom's death. Everything. And that was it for Minato. Until now, he had been able to grasp his composure. He desperately tried to hang on to the last piece of the dam that was holding his storming emotions at bay. Maelstrom. His boy really deserved his name. Because he stormed into his perfect little life, making it happier than ever only to crush it into millions of tiny pieces together with his will that previously had steadily held him together. It shattered to shards by that one sentence. He said it. Kushina. Kushina was going to die. His own life? It would be damned. But Kushina's. Their child's life. The large hall suddenly shrunk around him. Jiraiya flung his head to the side when he heard a painful, choking gasp from his former student's direction. His eyes were wild, the always intelligent pools foggy and feral. This was what he was afraid of. Minato lost it. He finally let go of his denial, but in doing so he entered more dangerous lands. The world around them suddenly tilted when Minato lost his grasp on his chakra control. His essence flared from moment to moment like a bacon, desperately trying to break the connection between him and Inoichi. One harsh wave finally shattered the already wobbling technique. A heavy breath rushed out from Naruto's sore mouth. His eyes immediately flung open to search for his father's. He found him several steps away. Naruto parted his lips to speak, to push out any coherent words, but he failed when he recognized the sheer panic in the identical blue pools. When he finally found his voice, it rasped through the room. "Dad!" The Hokage desperately shook his head and took a step backward, his back almost hitting the wall. "Minato!" Naruto corrected himself. In that moment, a loud knock could be heard behind the door, and an Anbu stepped into the small room, with a thin paper file in his hand. "The test results, Hokage-sama." Minato didn't move, but Jiraiya immediately saved his student from the situation. He raised his hand and took the file from the puzzled Anbu's hands. He left after a slight bow and one last, unsteady glance at his leader. The Sannin immediately flipped the brown cover open, chewing on his lower lip, while he ran his eyes over the lonely paper. His tongue unconsciously wetting his dry lips before he parted them. But no words came out at his first attempt. Nor his second. Finally, he was able to push out the results on his third try. It's matching, Minato. They are first-generation relatives. Mother and son." The Hokage shook his head violently once more and took another step back, his back hitting the wall with a loud thud. Minato's eyes darted to Jiraiya and back to Naruto's, and it almost made him try to sink into the hard wall. But his body was not ethereal. He couldn't slip through it. He had nowhere to run from the piercing blue eyes, shining with hope and a hint of despair which hadn't left, not even for a second. "Say something, please." No answer came. "Say something, goddammit!" Namikaze Minato, the Yellow Flash and the Yondaime Hokage of Konohagaku no Sato, did the first thing that had come into mind. An act that he had never ever done until this point in his life. He fled from the room with a brilliant golden flash. No word was spoken for an eternity after Minato's disappearance. Inoichi slowly sank down to the ground and hid his face in his trembling hands. Naruto continued to unblinkingly stare at the spot where his father had disappeared. He wasn't aware of what was happening around him until his muscles suddenly started tingling with numbness like there were thousands of ants marching inside his veins. He blinked back to reality. Jiraiya's hand was still on his chest above the disappearing paralysis seal. The Toad Sage made an apologetic smile as he crouched down to unbind Naruto's still secured arms and legs. Jiraiya restrained a wince when he was finally able to get rid of the ninja wire around his wrist, his eyes locking on his scarred skin. He blinked when he felt a surge of foreign chakra, and the bruise was almost immediately gone. Only the remaining pink shade indicated the previous injury on his skin. The blonde's hands curled up around the arm of the chair, his knuckles turning white. The Sannin slowly shook his head and straightened from his crouched position, his hand already on the blonde's tense shoulder, squeezing it reassuringly. "Give him some time." The time traveler blinked out the last fog from his vision and raised his head to glance up to the softly smiling man. "He will come to terms with it. He just needs time." The blonde slowly nodded. "Ero Sennin." Jiraiya made a sour grimace, but it soon morphed into a smile when Naruto continued. "I miss you." The Toad Sage playfully ruffled the golden mass. "You did good, Gaki. I'm proud of you." Uzumaki Naruto silently sat on the head of his father's face carved into the mountains. His legs were tucked tightly to his chest to offer some warmth and comfort, his chin resting on his folded arms. He had been sitting there for long hours. He didn't have the courage to go back to the Hokage mansion. He didn't have the courage to face with his father, with the fear and panic that burned inside his father's eyes before he ran away. He wasn't angry at him. At first, he was. Because he would never have thought that his father was a coward. He ran away from the problems. From him. But eventually he would calm down. Naruto stiffened, his muscles tensing when a new presence appeared behind his back, but he didn't move from his position. His cerulean eyes stared down at the village, completely unfocused. He didn't move or look elsewhere when he heard the textile's soft ruffle, when he felt the warmth of a body sinking down next to him. The two men sat next to each other without a word for unending minutes in total silence. Both of them waited for the other to start the conversation, but neither knew what to say. Finally, the older one found his voice to break the awkward stillness. You really painted poop on the second's face?" Minato was soft and calm, his voice sounding much more curious than worried. But the time traveler was sure that it was due to his will and not because his father was actually calm. He could see the slight shaking of his hands, the tension in his shoulders, the stiffness of his movements. Naruto nodded. "Yeah, the day before I graduated. Iruka-sensei made me scrub the monument clean with my bare hands. It took me the whole day." The edge of his lips curved up into a satisfied half-smile. "But it was worth it. That was the biggest prank in Konoha's history. The heavy mood suddenly melted away when a soft chuckle left Minato's mouth, forcing the time traveler to mimic it. How on earth did no one catch you doing it? What about the Anbu and the other shinobi? An ironic snort left Naruto's mouth. Anbu? I've been able to hide from them since I was 6. Gigi always glued 1 or 2 on me ever since I can remember, so it was a piece of cake. A small chuckle was again his answer from Minato, an annoying headshake. Elite of the elites, and they were led by their noses by a small kid once he figured out their standard lurking techniques. The mood lightened for a second, but it was gone again. The air became heavy around them again in the disturbing silence. Not even the nature around them made a sound, like she also felt the seriousness of the situation between the two men on the stone head. Minato slowly ran a hand through his golden locks and opened his mouth, but he was silenced when Naruto beat him to the chase. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. For the first time since the Hokage appeared, his son finally faced with him. I wanted to tell you the truth so much. I almost told you everything, but that damn secretary came in and… Naruto bit on his lower lip. However, his father knew what he had wanted to say. But you were afraid we wouldn't believe you, and we would put you into an asylum, weren't you? Naruto nodded. If that damn secretary hadn't rushed into the office, who knows what would have happened back then. Maybe that would have been better, if he confessed months ago. I understand, Naruto. The Jounin flinched slightly by the name, and quickly averted his gaze. He had craved for this moment for months, the moment when his father finally called him by his real name. But it was so surreal now. It's me who should apologize instead of you. I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am for what I did to you. Naruto immediately shook his head. You don't have to. That was the right decision. I never bore a grudge against you. I know why you did it, and I'm happy you believed in me, that one day I could handle the power you gave to me. And I have to tell you, Kurama and I are a good duo. Except when he has a bad day. You know, he can act like a harpy or a sulking child sometimes. Naruto shrugged, ruling out Kurama's harsh and furious snort. The time traveler ran a hand through his golden locks and continued. Growing up as an orphan was hard, but in the end, it just made me stronger. If you hadn't sealed him inside me, I would be long dead. So would a lot of people I really care for. Without his power, I wouldn't have been able to protect them. So I'm glad. Minato stayed in silence for a long moment, weighing his own thoughts, observing the flicker of light on his son's face. They were really important to you, weren't they? No. Minato raised a confused eyebrow at his son. They are still important. They are here even if they don't know about me. They are here again around me. They are alive. I failed last time, but there is no way I'll fail this time. I'll protect all of them. Minato stayed in silence for a stretch, watching his grown-up son curiously. He let out a sigh and ran his hand through his golden locks once again. I have so many questions, I don't know where to start. His eyes flared up for a second. You tricked me with the Rasengan. Minato folded his arms in front of his chest, almost sulking like a kid. Naruto let out a chuckle and waved his hand apologetically. Yeah, sorry about that. The Hokage pushed his broken pride aside, his eyes flared with curiosity. Who taught it to you? It was Erosenin when I was almost 13. After Gigi had died and we went to find Tsunade. We made a bet with Oba-chan. I won, and she gave me her necklace because I learned the technique in a week. In a week? Minato's brow rose until it disappeared under his forehead protector. A proud smile appeared on Naruto's face, relaxing his expression even more. Yup. And I developed the Raisin Shuriken for the first time by mixing it with wind chakra when I was 16. Kakashi-sensei helped me on that one. You've never let out everything during your fights, have you? Minato blurted out his question. His only answer was a wide and cheeky grin from his son. Minato's brows knitted together suspiciously. How strong are you? Naruto shrugged with a foxy grin, his eyes shining with the familiar mirth. I could kick your ass any time. Minato raised an eyebrow and a doubtful expression appeared on his face. I doubt it. Naruto only winked. And it made Minato uneasy in an instant. It wasn't a playful expression. It was confidence. How his son straightened himself. How his composure shifted. Another frown appeared on Minato's face when his thoughts wandered back to the conversation with the fox. The fox. His name is Kurama. Right. Kurama mentioned something. Minato fidgeted on the hard stone, his gaze traveling between the sleeping village and his son. He babbled about a lot of things. You should be a little bit more specific. The Jinchuriki said warily, not sure what his father was referring to. Minato shifted in his seat one last time before letting out a sigh. About you being my successor. What did he mean by that? It was now Naruto's turn to fidget on the stone, his ears burning crimson red, but in the next second, his nervousness was replaced with pride, his posture straightening unconsciously while his eyes shifted toward the village under their feet, and his mouth turned into a soft smile. Rokudaime. However, his small smile almost immediately faltered as the word left his lips, and his form slumped. Naruto didn't hear any answer, only a sharp breath from his father. So he continued. Before Tsunade Obichan died, she gave the hat to me. But I declined. I didn't feel strong enough. In a week, Konoha was gone completely, and that time, there was no one who could resurrect the dead. I never wore the title. Enormous silence fell among them, and Naruto didn't dare to glance to the side. He locked his eyes on the village under them to avoid his father's gaze burning his body from the side. I see. Minato finally murmured and let out the air he was holding until then. No, you don't. And if it's up to me, you never have to understand. Minato watched his son's sad, but determined gaze. A funny feeling spread across his chest, and it took him a while to identify the feeling. It was pride. He tucked his knees to rest his head on his folded arms. Hokage at 17, you're awesome, you know that? Naruto scratched the back of his head nervously, the previously serious mood gone in an instant. Well, actually I was 16 and a half, you know? But Gaara was even younger when Suna elected him. He was 15. Gaara, he was precious to me. When I first met him at the Chunin exam, he was insane. He thought Shikako was his mother. He hated everyone, and he loved only himself. He was what I could have became if there wasn't Iruka-sensei, or Ayam-chan and Old Man Tucci, or Sandaime Jiji. I could have snapped, and I could have become the same murderous beast. What happened to him? How could he become Kazekage like that? A wide smirk spread across Naruto's face. I beat some sense into his thick skull. The blonde Jounin glanced to the side to note his father's confused face. He made a hesitant shrug before he continued. I don't know what I had told him exactly, but it pushed him into the right direction. That is how you knew about the seal, about Shikako. Naruto only nodded, but it faltered halfway. Well, technically I did hear Shikako. So I wasn't lying to you. The Bijou, they can talk to each other if they want to. Minato nodded in understanding. He was already over the lies. Minato observed the teen, no, his son, for a long moment. Then he suddenly made a confused face. How old are you exactly? The younger made a wondering face. It depends. Do I have to count the time since I'm here? Minato shrugged, not sure of the answer himself. A quick count later, Naruto answered. I came here a month before my 17th birthday. Then I'll be 18 on the 10th of October. 18. Minato repeated softly, his gaze still on his son's features. He studied his face for a long, silent minute, his eyes lingering on the small traces of childhood still hovering on his features, but he could already see the sharper jawline and hints of a soon-to-be fine man. And now, he found Kushina in him. The shape of his eyes. The contour of his jawline. The smile that now shadowed his mouth as Naruto watched him watching him. He was so blind. His son's hesitant voice kicked him out from his thoughts. Did you tell Kushina? Does Mom know about me? Minato slowly shook his head, and an embarrassed expression appeared on his face. No, I haven't been home. I was wandering in Konoha. Mostly. The older blonde muttered in the end. Do you want to tell her? The time traveler nodded. I want to, but I don't know how she will handle it. That she suddenly got a grown-up son. Minato made a wondering look, and a cheeky smile appeared on his face. He couldn't help himself as the teasing so naturally slipped from his mouth. I think she'll be glad that you're out of diapers. Naruto had frozen, but after a second, he gladly chuckled at the joke and playfully hit his father's shoulder. It was surprisingly easy to slip back to the old customs. For both of them. Like the previous day hadn't shaken the very base of their connection. Like nothing had happened before. But none of them could deny the fact that something had changed. If not a significant thing, but something had definitely affected their relationship. The way they looked at each other. How they reached for each other's company. Both of them finally realized that everything could change and could be gone in a blink if they let it. Their relationship became closer and stronger than ever, even without words. It was a silent understanding. Minato wordlessly watched his unnaturally silent son with a small, caring smile on his face. She'll manage. It'll be hard at first. It was hard for me too. But I could handle it, and she'll also handle it. She is stronger than me in some cases. I know. Naruto softly agreed and unconsciously fidgeted closer to his father. The Hokage indeed realized the small motion, but didn't move, nor disturb the shooting warmth next to him. He let it wrap around their bodies, stilling their thoughts. They watched together as more and more lights disappeared from the windows as the citizens retreated back to their homes and beds. The night was still warm despite the fact that the end of the year was closer than the middle of it. Minato finally straightened from his seat and raised his inviting hand toward the younger. Come on. It's almost dawn. Kushina must be furious wondering where we are. Naruto hesitantly eyed the offered hand, but with time, he gratefully grabbed it. Both were gone with a flicker of their golden locks to discover a new aspect of their relationship. Kurama was silent during the last hour or so. His attention was glued inward on the troubled form under the tree. The copy uneasily chewed his lip, and Kurama could see the flicker of fear in the black and red eyes as his form wobbled from time to time. His silhouette became unsteady, and the fox could see the rough surface of the tree through him. The Bijou eyed the defiant mirror image for long minutes. He could see the same stubbornness and the same determination he would in Naruto, grasping into his last resort to stretch his remaining existence as long as he could. But Kurama also caught a glimpse of the hurt. Loneliness, like his existence, was needless. Like he was unwanted. His teeth were clenched and a muscle flickered in his jaw. The entity finally raised his head, his eyes accusingly pinning Kurama in place, freezing the breath in his lungs he was about to let out. You can be happy. You won't see me for some time. But you can't get rid of me. You will never be able to stop me. I will live! He spat venomously, his eyes hardening with determination again. Kurama held his gaze and finally released the breath he was holding. I know. I finally understand. Black eyes widened with disbelief, his shoulders tensing as Kurama continued in the same, calm and shooting voice. Naruto was wiser than me. He was well aware of your presence, but he wasn't afraid of you like me. I finally understand that you'll always be here because you are needed. What? He whispered with confusion and disbelief. You are not an obstacle like I first thought. Things will always happen, good or bad, that will strengthen or weaken Naruto. But that's what makes him human. This is what forms his personality. He'll always have a good side, but he will always have a little devil on his shoulder whispering in his ears. The key is balance. Without you, he wouldn't be the one he is now. I owe you a thank you for it. The entity opened his mouth, then closed it, the edge of his midnight black eyes becoming gray. The until then restrained whiteness returned and slowly overwhelmed the gray area. In a minute, the red irises turned into piercing blue. Kurama. What, brat? Thanks, he murmured softly. A small, invisible smile tugged the copy's lips upward, and that was the only recognizable expression before his form shattered into millions of fragments. They floated in the soft wind like millions of petals until the breeze carried away the last one together with his last words. Another presence faded back to reality with a satisfied, soft smile on his face. Uzumaki Naruto silently retreated from his mindscape like he was never even there. Chapter 30. Late Bloomers. A battle of wills took place inside the Hokage's office, two fighters the only ones present. The defiant individuals had been trying to force submission on the other. They were completely uncompromising, which only made their situation worse. Naruto stubbornly refused to let go, staring into Jiraiya's narrowed eyes, his azure pools hardened with obstinacy and another emotion the sage couldn't define. The soundless fight ended with the older's defeat, throwing his arms high into the air with a frustrated snort. Why the hell are you protecting that guy? Naruto raised an eyebrow, repeating the verb with a hushed tone. Protecting? His face twisted into a scandalized grimace like the whole idea was turning his stomach upside down. I'm not protecting him. Yes, you are! Jiraiya snapped, clenching his hands into fists, but he received no real answer, only narrowed eyes with a hard edge. The sage let out a sigh in the hope that it would ease away some of his frustration. Well, it didn't. So he tried another tactic. Look, Naruto. We have to know every single detail about that night, and that includes his identity. You know who he is. Just tell me, and I promise I won't tell anyone else. And what if I don't want you to know? Naruto's voice was cold, but his pleading eyes told a different tale in Jiraiya's head. Don't ask because I don't want to hurt you. The sage shook off the echoing voice in his mind and sunk deep into the sofa beside the wall, burying his face into one of his hands. I know you're trying to keep us safe, but it'll do no good. I don't care if a ghost or even Kakashi is lurking behind that mask, but we have to know. Your family's life is on the line, and you still don't understand the seriousness of this. It's as if you don't want to change it. Jiraiya glanced between his fingers at the tense teen, his eyes widening for a fraction and visible dread rushing over his face. You don't want to save them. The sage breathed in horror, not really sure of the emotion that had flashed through Naruto's face a second ago. You think I'm just going to stand to the side after all of this shit and watch as he does it again? Naruto whispered with total disbelief. Fury rose in his gut, nearly obliterating his rational mind before it miraculously settled down. With a snort, he released the tension, and he folded his arms in front of his chest, turning away from his godfather with an unreadable expression. Don't try to manipulate my emotions for another slip, you pervert! It worked once, but it won't work again. Before the situation could escalate into another battle, this time with real weapons, another person flashed into the office and raised an eyebrow at the scene. His son was silently sulking, and his sensei looked disappointed beyond words. Minato shook his head with an exasperated sigh. Do I even want to know? Naruto let out another snort and squeezed his arms around himself. Minato shook his head once more, this time his voice serious without the previous cheeky tone. Come, Naruto. She's waiting for us. The blonde boy slowly turned, and the previous strain was gone. Actually, he looked ready to faint, like all of his bones had suddenly vanished. One tiny poke would be enough to make the suddenly pale boy drop to the ground. With a gulp, Naruto nodded. He'll do it. Definitely. For sure. Somehow. Uzumaki Kushina silently sat on the long couch with a very troubled Minato by her side, and a fidgeting younger blonde in the armchair opposite her. Jiraiya silently occupied an empty corner, his eyes closed, disregarding everything around him. He was sulking. Yeah. Kushina made an imaginary nod. Her arms unconsciously traveled toward her round tummy to cup it up and down. She raised her eyebrow in suspicion, her gaze flickering between the two blondes until it settled down on the younger one. And once more, oh, why the hell should I go to meditate? Naruto glanced up at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. Bracing himself, his eyes hardened with a new light before exhaling. Just trust in me, please. Kushina didn't respond, only her brows furrowed, and her eyes narrowed slightly. A second later, she let out a defeated sigh and closed her eyes to drift away from reality, as Naruto had told her. Unnoticed by her, the blonde boy did the same. The outside noises slowly faded, then disappeared entirely to be replaced by a disturbing tinkling. Chains. Even if she didn't have to, she still raised her head high and slowly opened her eyes to glance up at her captive and his restraints to verify it. The beast was still there, chained up and still glaring daggers at her. She narrowed her eyes when she noticed something odd. The fox was glaring behind her and not at her. The redhead followed her instincts and immediately swung around, raising her fist as soon as she sensed someone else behind her. But her attack couldn't reach its target. An iron grip stopped the motion midair. However, she also restrained its power as soon as she identified the man in front of her. Kushina immediately relaxed, and the grip disappeared from her wrist. Her eyes intensely searched the others. The intruder's piercing blue eyes were glued on the frowning Kyuubi behind her. Why did you want to speak with me here so much? Kushina demanded impatiently as she took a step forward. Uncertain eyes drifted toward her, silently observing the soft features until she became weary. Naruto glanced up one last time at the fox and took a step to the side, his eyes staring unfocused at the yellowish void. Kurama! Kushina's brows moved into one coherent line. What was that? Electric blue pools drifted back upwards to the fox. You wanted to know which bijou I had been hosting. His name is Kurama, he answered softly, his gaze still holding the fox's behind Kushina. So the time has come to reveal your true identity? The Kyuubi's voice boomed over the place, his enormous crimson pools scanning Naruto's face with a puzzled glint. It actually looked somewhat amused. Truth has a cost, little human. A small, sincere smile formed on his lips. Secrets have their own. Even greater. The giant bijou didn't answer, but he let his eyes drift on an empty spot behind the blonde. Kushina suddenly stilled, unaware of the fox's reaction. Her eyes widened, and her heart rate increasing as the air shimmered and shifted behind the blonde. Orange fur took shape, giant paws and sharp fangs evolved until the whole tremendous form appeared gradually from the bits. With time, Kushina faced an identical version of her own captive. There were only 3 differences. 1. The new one was significantly smaller. But that didn't mean that it couldn't have eradicated complete districts with the swing of its tail if it wanted to. Second, which was the most frightening aspect of the 3 yet still not the most disturbing, was that the fox was completely free. There were no chains, no stakes, nothing to hinder it from a bloody rampage. The enormous specimen was only steps from her, free from any restraints. She could hear its slow and calm breathing, the soft ruffling of its fur as it shifted with each inhale and exhale. And she could also hear its drumming heart. The beat was steady, calm. maybe a little bit faster thanks to its excitement. But the most disturbing thing, however, was the look in its eyes. The warm, nostalgic glint in the crimson orbs as they were scrutinizing her while she still couldn't even move a finger. Uzumaki Kushina. It suddenly boomed and opened its mouth to say more, but it didn't get an opportunity. Her blonde companion let out a sigh and shook his head slowly. Nice and dramatic performance, Kurama. I almost got chills. Kushina's eyes went even wider when he finally turned and took a step toward the smaller fox, which also shifted his weight. From Kushina's point of view, it definitely looked threatening. The way the fox slightly turned, slowly raising its paw with the acute claws to ready them to dash out and cut him into half. Without thinking, golden chakra chains shot out from her, efficiently restraining the until now unfettered Bija. The metallic links were twisting around his suddenly still form, his neck and limbs, one at his chest, dragging the enormous body to the ground until it smashed into the ground with a loud boom. Naruto, however, had been stoically observing the scene, and his only visible reaction was a raised amused eyebrow. But his composure soon faltered as his shoulders started to tremble by restrained laughter. And his dam, what had been restraining his snicker, shattered into millions of pieces when Kurama tried to raise but failed. Miserably, because his mouth shut with a heavy snap when his body had smashed against the floor once more despite his best effort. Naruto's loud guffaws echoed in the empty void for long minutes. What the hell are you laughing at, brat? It snarled, struggling against the bonds, but the voice held no malice. It sounded more embarrassed and vicious. Crimson eyes flared with annoyance instead of rage, and Kushina hesitated for a second. Not more than a fraction of a heartbeat, but the chains loosened and in the next moment the Bija was free, links snapped one by one and the web disappeared from his body. Kushina narrowed her eyes and tensed her muscles, ready to shoot another set of the golden technique, but a slow movement caught her eyes and made her stop. It was Naruto, slowly turning to step next to the creature. She instinctively reached out, and this time it was her who grabbed his wrist and yanked him back. Naruto's eyes drifted from his secured arm up to Kushina's, and he smiled. Everything's going to be all right. Her eyes suspiciously darted on his features, looking for any trace of a lie, but she found none. Her head bent down in a weak nod, her hold gradually loosening with the motion, and Naruto slipped out of her grip to confidently walk to the fox's side. Kurama's lips curled back, revealing a set of his fangs, each longer than Kushina. A low growl echoed in the nothingness for long seconds, while the boy finally reached the Bijou, which only continued gnashing its teeth. His hands brushed over the soft fur of a paw while he passed by it, but the Kyuubi didn't move or draw away from the touch, only his snarl lessened. Kushina's every nerve screamed for escape, to bolt out of her mindscape and grab the blonde on the way into safe reality, and bed herself in Minato's arms. But her curiosity and her stubbornness were stronger than her instincts. So she waited. He's Kurama. I'm housing the almighty nine-tailed demon fox. Naruto awkwardly motioned up. Or a version of him. With time, he glanced up to seek verification, which actually came in the form of a small nod. And what happened next amused Kushina enough to let her mouth fall open. The giant entity raised a paw and flipped him on the head. The blonde growled, desperately nursing his crown, but he still got the strength to punch the fox's feet, his features scrunching up with an annoyed grimace. They were bickering. She mused silently. Hey! What was that for? For being an idiot. The Bija snapped, and shot a pointed glare, but not toward Naruto but toward Kushina, who flinched a step backward. What kind of version? Kushina demanded, her eyes narrowing at Naruto. But it wasn't he who answered the question. A version from the future. Yeah, or a bastard version of him. He corrected playfully, punching once again the giant paw. Kurama's narrowed eyes drifted down to Naruto's crown disapprovingly, and he could feel the stabbing glare clearly on himself. Sorry. He mumbled and the skin smoothened as Kurama let the mood sink, before he had spoken. We're here most likely thanks to a space-time ninjutsu. Orangish fur furrowed on his forehead, concentrating his attention entirely on the still woman. When I said, we, do you know what I meant, Kushina? Do you know now who this boy really is? The redhead didn't answer immediately, her eyes glued on the silent form of the blonde as he restlessly shifted from foot to foot. With time, she took one hesitant step toward the fidgeting boy, her eyes drifting upward. Kurama held her gaze for a fraction of a second before he made a small, encouraging motion with his head. Even Kushina surprised herself when she actually took another step after that motion, but her first feeling wasn't suspicion like any other time the Kyuubi had indicated anything. It was excitement. Then she had made another, more steady step. The third and the fourth would have looked almost confident if her eyes hadn't drifted upward to make sure that the fox hadn't moved from its previous place, due to the remains of her still protesting instincts. But on a whim, she tossed them to the side and bolted. In the next blink, Naruto found himself inside a crushing hug. Strong arms held him steadily with the promise that if they released him, the world would shatter, just like his bones if he even twitched. Another squeeze and the air was out from his lungs. But he didn't protest, he didn't struggle. He enjoyed it. It was a masochistic act because, despite the fact that it did actually hurt, he welcomed the sensation with all of his heart. I thought it was a dream, Kushina mumbled. But it was real then. You're Naruto. Her grip tightened, then softened a fraction. Naruto utilized the slip to raise and fold his own arms around her back to give her a small squeeze. You knew? How? He whispered with equal softness, inhaling her faint, but still sweet, vanilla smell. She stilled in his arms, but almost immediately relaxed. I eavesdropped. She paused before continuing. Once, when you had visited the Kyubi, I had remembered a dream when you were sitting on its head. You know, the one when the Sandaime appeared in green spandex at the end. And days later during one of my dreams. She stopped once more, before a small awkward giggle escaped her lips. You know, I was swimming in a bowl of ramen and next I found myself inside my seal. She mumbled and stopped, her eyes squeezing shut. And I spotted you again. You were talking about your past, and your Kyubi addressed you and... Sorry about the secrecy. He exhaled slowly, placing a small kiss on her temple. It's okay. She finally took a step backward, but her hands still cupped his face. She brushed a tuft aside to look straight into his pools. I'm glad you finally decided to open up. It actually wasn't intentional. He half-heartedly shrugged, glancing upward to send a set of imaginary daggers toward Kurama. But now I'm actually glad it happened, you know? She suddenly stilled when a new realization hit her. The fox. Why, he is free. His name's Kurama. And he isn't that bad of a guy, if you know him. He's my partner, you know? Her eyes widened and immediately drifted upward, then behind her back, where the bigger version silently observed the scene. But his lips were still twisted into a disapproving snarl. Slowly, she made her decision and nodded in understanding. If you say so, then I'll also trust in him. It went better than with your father, I guess. Kurama boomed with an obvious, amused edge in his voice. Why? What happened with Minato? Kushina curiously glanced upward also, but she had to take some steps backward to actually catch a glimpse of the searching crimson pools. Her only answer was a wide, maybe a bit sadistic smirk from Kurama. And she definitely didn't like that. She couldn't shake off the feeling that this comment was the start of his payback for her chakra-chained attack. Naruto sat atop his father's stone head on the monument, staring out at the sleeping village. The sky had been steadily brightening for about 30 minutes, though the sun was still behind the distant mountains. Nature was stirring but not yet fully awake as a bird chirped, and a few bushes rustled. His bed had tossed him out when the night was still dark, and the dim gray of the early morning was still far. He retreated to his well-known place where he could do whatever he wanted, mostly just sitting, staring at his beloved village, silently watching over her like a guardian of fire. It was peaceful break in the crisp early morning, a nice change from the chaos that had been plaguing his life in the last days. He sat there, eyes closed, letting his thoughts fade away as time drifted on, and nature began to wake. It felt good to just sit, doing absolutely nothing, no thinking or worrying over anything. The sun suddenly appeared over the horizon, bombarding him with warm glowing rays. He leaned back, allowing the golden shafts to gently warm his body, ease his weariness, and soothe his soul. Naruto inhaled slowly, then exhaled, releasing the tension that had been building in his muscles over the last several weeks, inviting the calm serenity of his surroundings to seep into the very fiber of his being. He remained like that for an unknown amount of time before a familiar chakra signature appeared in the peripheral of his senses. The blonde let out a small, non-committal sigh. A few minutes later, Hiruzen materialized from the shadows, making a polite amount of noise, though it wasn't necessary, and meandered his way over to the edge of the monument to take in the elegant beauty of the village below. A companionable silence rested between them as both stared out at their beloved home. An invincible sense of curiosity began to prickle Naruto's mind, threatening his serenity, but he pushed it back. There was no way he was giving up this wonderful peace. He'd wait for the old man to make the first step, and this time, it wouldn't be him to rush head first into any situation. And his intuition was right. The old leader made the first step with his next exhale. Peaceful, isn't it? The once Kage said slowly, chewing on the words and on the end of his pipe. It was more of a statement than a question, but Naruto nodded and answered anyway, a smile forming on his face as he gazed fondly across the village. Yes. Silence reigned once again, and several long minutes passed with no response from Hiruzen. Naruto began to wonder if their conversation would even continue as he let his eyes wander from building to building. The air around them was losing its frosty bite in the sunlight, a woodpecker starting to rap on a tree in the distance, giving a faint and rhythmical background music. Soon, more species joined to nature's bass. The drumbeat was augmented with the chorus of birds. A lonely cricket joined as a solo violin player, and the rustling leaves harp made the symphony perfect. Torikoku-kun, you have given me a fine jigsaw, Sarutobi finally began some time later. Naruto blinked, then inclined his head, inviting his companion to continue with a slight tension in his shoulders. It was more out of curiosity than anxiety. He had nothing to lose anymore. And it felt good. He was finally at complete ease. He didn't even bother trying to get a word in as Hiruzen paused. He decided to just listen. Actually, he was curious to see where this conversation would end up. When I exhausted every possible trail I could think of, I returned to the beginning when you were first brought to the hospital, hoping I could remember something that might shed some light on your existence. When you first appeared in Konoha, you seemed to recognize me, the Sandaime said, choosing his words with care. And not only me, but Minato as well. At first, I thought our reputations had preceded us. But your reactions told a different story. Let's start with Minato. According to him, when he threatened you in that hospital hallway, you didn't pause or even blink. Instead, you retorted immediately, brushing him off with no regard for your own safety. But that wasn't what really had me wondering. It was the fact that there was no fear in your eyes, absolutely none. I'd never seen an enemy shinobi able to hide their fear at the sight of Minato. But you, not only did you not show any fear, you showed sadness and caring, the exact opposite of what a complete stranger would be showing. So, I figured that Minato must have a doppelganger out there, but then I realized that I would have heard of such a person. A highly skilled shinobi with blonde hair. Sarutobi gave a pointed look. That includes you. With the strength you possess and your likeness to Minato, I'm sure I would have learned of your existence well before you crash-landed in that training field. But I hadn't. Nor had Jiraiya, even with his extensive spy network. I thought to myself, how is it possible for this boy to exist for so long without our knowledge? I remembered the shock you'd shown upon seeing me. But you weren't just shocked, you were dumbfounded. It was as if you were staring at a dead man walking. And since I had exhausted every other possible trail I could think of, I considered that maybe you were seeing a dead man walking. I mulled over what that could mean, but could find no logical explanation for it. Eventually, I decided to simply watch and wait for you to reveal more of yourself, but the more you became a part of the village, the less sense my theories made, at least until yesterday. It wasn't a very logical line of thinking, but I had exhausted all other options, so I decided to entertain the thought. I assumed you'd known me where you came from, and if I assumed the same for Minato, then your reaction to the both of us made sense. Expanding on that reasoning, I wondered what situation would have to occur for this to be true. Do you know what I concluded? Hiruzen didn't actually wait for an answer, pinning the blonde with a serious gaze. Nothing. Until finding one more puzzle piece, thanks to Noirarin and Orochimaru. A sour grimace spread across the old leader's face, but he brushed his wandering thoughts aside. My late student made a blood test we hadn't conducted back then. Why would we have? It would have been so illogical. But it revealed that you had one more relative here in Konoha. And with that missing piece, it finally clicked. Hiruzen's face gradually softened, and a smile tugged his lips upward, deepening the starting wrinkles at the edge of his mouth. Your whisker marks. Sarutobi pointed toward his cheeks. I'd heard about Kinkaku and Ginkaku when I was only a teenager. The tales said they'd gotten the same markings. It's because of the Kyuubi's influence. I've always known that if Minato and Kushina had a child, he or she would be a genius, but never in my wildest dreams I would have thought about what you, my child, have achieved. A rip in the space-time continuum. Time travel. Naruto stared, wide-eyed, unable to say anything. What could he say? So instead of saying anything, he started laughing. Hard. Loudly. And for a long time. Loosely, without any control. And it felt so good that it was hard to stop. But it slowly died down anyway. Gigi. You're really the professor, aren't you? Hiruzen shrugged with a small smile and gracefully settled down next to the blonde boy. With decades of experience, his fingers fluidly flipped his small tobacco box open, and in seconds, faint bluish smoke enveloped their sitting forms. What about a proper introduction this time, Gigi? The blonde turned toward his companion with a wide and foxy grin. Hiruzen only let out a soft chuckle and shook his head. You've turned into a real fine man, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. How? How the hell do you know my real name? The Hokage let out another chuckle and lowered his pipe. I know that Minato had chosen that name. And since Kushina is the last of her clan, you should have had her surname instead of Minato. Even if he had become the fourth Hokage, the subsistence of the Uzumaki clan is more important than to carry on the surname of a small Konoha family. Naruto hesitantly nodded at the explanation, but in the end shook his head, his eyes darting back to the rooftops of the village. It must be hard, being near them, but they not knowing who you are. It was, Naruto admitted, his eyes trailing back to Sarutobi. But the serious answer faltered as a cheeky smile appeared on Naruto's face. But you know, Gigi, you're late with your revelation. Oh? Hiruzen inhaled out, together with a lungful of smoke. So you've already told them? Well, let's say that they figured it out. The blonde scratched the back of his head, but his grin never faltered. I guess it is better this way, Sarutobi stated, his gaze lingering on the blonde beside him. The once leader let out a long sigh. Who raised you, Naruto? The teen didn't answer, his fingers trailing a small crack next to him to gain some time. Mostly myself. My birth went wrong. There was an uncomfortable silence before the Sandaime cleared his throat. And Jiraiya? Where was he during your childhood? His only answer was a shrug. Another long sigh escaped Sarutobi. I'm sorry. For what? Naruto looked up, his eyes and fingers still scanning the crack. For prohibiting him from raising you. Naruto's brow furrowed, but he's still avoiding eye contact, so the once Hokage continued. Around a month ago, he and I had a talk about the worst-case scenario. About what would happen if Kushina's seal broke, and Minato was gone. It seems for once Jiraiya really followed my orders despite what his heart had said to him. He argued like a maniac. Naruto didn't make any comment, but he did store this information. And it finally settled down some of his thoughts about where the hell his godfather was during his childhood. He had thought Jiraiya was just like that. The sometimes unreasonable perv, and Sarutobi had thought it would be better if he avoided him until he could take care of his own sanity. But it seems it was the ninja system that ruined his childhood. It wasn't Jiraiya. It was the fact that Jiraiya followed orders. Orders that left him alone. Orders that prohibited Jiraiya to seek him out before he was ready to defend himself. It was because of the circle of hatred that he had no one to turn to during a sleepless night. It was because of that he had nobody at home he could turn to. And for the first time in his life, he hated this corrupted system that could make a child lonely. That could shatter families. That could make a child kill an entire clan. His own family. His father was right. The current shinobi system only fueled the circle, and he vowed to break that problem at its roots. Hiruzen's voice kicked him out from his internal musing before he could dive deeper. What about Kakashi? Do you want to tell him the truth? Naruto hesitated for a fraction before he shook his head. No, I respect the man who he will become, but he is not the same now. I would break him, and he's already broken enough after losing Rin. He shook his head once more. I don't want to shatter him. Right now he's confused enough. Another tiff of the smoke left Hiruzen's body, the soft mist dancing in the unmoving air around them. The light flickered on its surface from time to time, revealing the hidden beautiful dance. You like sitting here? Yeah, he mused internally. And why does he actually do this? Because it's peaceful here? Because everything seems much clearer from here? His problems seemed as far away and as small as the small dots of the villagers from above. Or was it maybe because of the height? Was it because of the reassurance that Konoha was indeed still there every time he had looked down on the village? Naruto's eyes drifted toward the center, a soft, sincere smile lingering on his lips. It gives me reassurance. Seeing Konoha safe and sound day by day. No words were exchanged for another long moment. Both men let their gazes rest on the village under their feet, one still looking for reassurance that it won't be gone in the next second, slipping through his fingers if he dared to blink, and the other out of simple habit, or more likely, respecting the other's feelings. A new presence stepped through the limits of their senses, and Naruto immediately flung his head toward the newcomer with a raised eyebrow. Jiraiya strolled into the scene, his cheeks flushed, and his steps faltered from time to time while he tiffed from a sake bottle. It was a long journey for the sage, wobbling from tree to tree, resting between every other one. The toad summoner sloppily hopped between the two sitting men, pushing them toward the edge. Only the chakra that Naruto and the once leader tapped in to restrain them from falling from Minato's stone head face down on the crowded square. But Jiraiya wasn't bothering with these kind of tiny things like their safety. He enthusiastically flung his arm around Naruto's head, and to the blonde's biggest annoyance, he immediately imprisoned him in a headlock, ruffling his blonde mess constantly. But Naruto wasn't giving himself up easily. He was finally able to struggle out from the iron grip with a well-aimed punch at his godfather's gut, but Jiraiya only let out a bark of laughter, tossing his pain to the side. "Hey! What the hell are you doing, Ero-sennin?" Naruto grumbled while desperately trying to bring his lock back into proper shape. Well, he failed. Miserably. He sent another set of imaginary daggers toward the still giggling, white-haired man and shot a questioning glance at the stoically puffing Sandaime. But he got no help from him. He just shrugged and let out a puff of smoke. Jiraiya finally steadied himself, but the goofy smile never left his face. "Hey, old man. Can I tell you a secret?" Even if he had asked, the Sennin gave him no opportunity. "My godson will be so badass. Just like me." Hiruzen irked an amused eyebrow and cocked his head to the side. "Oh? And how would you know that?" "I just know because I'm awesome. He'll be smart and strong, and he'll kick the bad guy's ass just like me." "Drop the act, pervert. He figured it out all on his own," Naruto muttered, his arms folding in front of his chest. "What? You've ruined my game. I wanted to tease you more. Why the hell are you so damn smart?" Jiraiya's shouts died down to annoyed muttering. The familiar pout was soon on his lips, and the man eventually folded his arms in front of his chest. Sarutobi shook his head at his obviously sulking, grown-up student. His gaze flickered toward Naruto, and his face softened. "You know what? I think you are right, Jiraiya. Your godson will be a very fine man when he grows up. Don't you agree, Naruto-kun?" But the named blonde was too occupied to hide his embarrassment, and his flaming cheeks to answer. Jiraiya hummed and swung his arms once more around the flushing teen with a wide grin on his face. But this time, Naruto didn't get the urge to free himself when his godfather viciously ruffled his untidy crown. Sarutobi let out a loud chuckle, slowly straightening from the ground and brushing down some invisible dirt from his flawless attire. "I think that was more than enough excitement for me today." None of the others protested. Slowly shaking his head, the Sandaime disappeared in the same way that he had arrived. The Toad Sage grinned widely while releasing his hold on Naruto, his fingers already searching inside his pouch. "Well, this actually makes things easier. At least I won't have to explain this to the old geezer." With that, he raised his hand to reveal a small scroll in it. Naruto suspiciously eyed the storage scroll, and when his godfather indicated with his head, he carefully grabbed it and turned over several times. "What's this?" "A gift. I thought you've been missing it." The blonde's brows moved into one coherent line as his eyes scanned through the closing seal. It wasn't a tricky one. With a flicker of his chakra, the seal had opened, and another scroll fell into his lap. However, it was significantly bigger, almost half his own size. And it was heavy. Naruto's eyes immediately widened when he recognized the chiseled ornament on both sides. He made one side glance at Jiraiya, and when he got one more encouraging nod, he enthusiastically rolled it open in front of him. The soft breeze ruffled the edge, but Naruto's hands held it steadily. As your eyes darted from names to names on the ancient old surface until he found Jiraiya's and his father's names at the end. "Go on, Gaki. As long as I know, you've got every right to have your name on it." A wide grin spread across Naruto's face, and with an enthusiastic nod, he immediately bit his thumb. Experienced fingers danced across the fine fabric, tidy, perfect lines forming from the finest ink, from his own blood. Within seconds, the Toad summoning contract was blessed with one more name, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto immediately smeared his still leaking blood on his palm, and his hands were already forming the so-missed hand signs, when an iron grip on his wrist stopped him from moving further in the progress. The blonde quirked an eyebrow at the frowning pervert and cocked his head. "If you're going to summon anyone, you should do it where you've got space. I can easily imagine that you were about to summon Gamabunta on top of the Hokage monument." Naruto was silent, but his eyebrow twitched with irritation. "I'm not that big of an idiot." He tore his hand free and continued with his summon at a much slower pace. But a small trail of sweat slowly dripped down from his temple. He actually really wanted to show off. When he finished the last hand sign, he slammed his palm onto the hard stone with ease, eagerly waiting for the soft, chakra-enchained smoke to finally die down over the still visible, obsidian seal array. It happened when the breeze grabbed the soft dust and tossed it to the side to reveal a tadpole? A confused grimace disfigured Naruto's face while Jiraiya's loud guffaws echoed over the village. A nearby lurking Anbu perked up at the booming laughter, only to shake his head slowly in disapproval. He was pretty sure that sitting on the Yondaime's stone head was prohibited. But who was he to tell the very man's brother, and one of the Sannin, that they were breaking the rules? The masked soldier shook his head once more and continued on his way toward his destination. Naruto leaned closer to the struggling, tiny little thing, and his brows furrowed, disregarding Jiraiya's snicker in the background. He surely used the necessary amount of chakra. He did find the faint chakra signature he was looking for. He leaned even closer until his nose was only centimeters from the trashing thing when his eyes widened in realization. Gamakichi! The tiny creature stilled, and Naruto would have sworn that it blinked up at him in surprise. Then the toddler toad puffed out from existence. Naruto straightened, his nose scrunching up with annoyance as his godfather's laughter slowly became hysterical. Oh, shut up! I did want to summon him, but I thought he would be bigger. But his words did no good. The toad summoner, instead, bent over in his laughter and rolled to his side, slowly wheeling toward the edge of the enormous monument. Naruto perked up, and with a slight kick, he helped his godfather gather some momentum and cover the remaining distance to the edge in a second. It took a full 10 seconds for Jiraiya to stomp back to the top. His face was red, and his shoulders still trembled from the strain as he had found a hold on Minato's nose at the last second to stop him from falling off the Hokage monument. If it had happened above a female bathhouse, he wouldn't have gotten any complaints for splashing into the circle of nude women. But seeing Naruto's smug face, a vein started to bulge out of his forehead. A wide, cheeky grin spread across Naruto's face, his lips parting, and his tongue slipped out in a childish manner. With a flicker of his chakra, Jiraiya bolted toward the already fleeing blonde. But at least the Sannin still had enough composure to grab the summoning scroll as he rushed beside it in his hurry to chase down his godson. The house went still after each of its tenants finally retreated back to their rooms. It was long hours ago. The next morning was closer than midnight. No sound could be heard besides the soft, rhythmical breathing of the sleeping family members. Only one of them couldn't find any sleep. The oldest, Namikaze Minato, silently munched his late snack, a lukewarm cup of instant ramen. It was pretty hot half an hour ago, when he had actually made it, but his appetite was gone after the first bites. Minato unconsciously stirred the soup, making the soaked noodles slowly whirl inside the cup. He thought about nothing, his mind was empty, which was actually surprising after the hellish previous week. It wasn't an everyday occasion when your brother turned out to be your almost grown-up son. But actually it hadn't been bothering him that much. Well, yeah, it did bother him in some ways, but he was glad because he knew now that his son would grow up to be a fine man. And his past? Or future? Or whatever? He was sure as hell that he wouldn't let it happen again. Not in the same way. Because he would save Kushina. He would save Naruto from his fate. However, there was one tiny little flaw in his logic. Naruto refused to share more info about that night. And more particularly, about the masked man. He had told them his abilities, about his Sharingan, his fighting style, but he had been refusing to tell them his identity. With a sigh, Minato let the thought slip before he could dig deeper. All the theories he and Jiraiya had made up about the masked man and the billion consequences his son's time travel would do made his head spin and his mind dizzy. With a groan, Minato pushed the almost untouched cup to the side and slumped on the table, resting his head on one straight arm. He eyed the ramen cup for some time, his head strangely empty. But he got tired of staring at the goofily grinning cartoon kid on the side of the plastic very soon. With a frustrated snort, he pushed himself up and headed to his bedroom, determined to have at least an hour of sleep before he actually had to head off to work. The passage was dark, but thanks to the faint light, he could see where he was going. His eyes brushed over his brother's. No. He shook his head. Naruto's room, he corrected himself. And the sight made him stop. A faint strip of light escaped under the closed door. His ears twitched, trying to strengthen his ears in the hope that he could pick up any noise. But he caught only Naruto's weak snoring. A small smile creaked his lips upward, and without any second thought, he carefully pushed the door open to sneak a peek at his son. Only to be sure that he hadn't disappeared. And indeed, his son was there, spread-eagled all over the bed, occupying every single available corner he could. And those that he could not reach physically, those parts were filled with his rumpled bedsheet, an unsteadily balancing ink bottle, and a scroll running through half of his room from his bed. Minato couldn't help himself. Muffled laughter escaped his lips. But he immediately shut his mouth when Naruto stilled, then slightly turned, stretching even more. But his worries wore away when Naruto continued to slumber with a slightly louder snore. The Hokage inched closer to free the blanket under Naruto's leg and put it back in its proper place atop the still snoring teen. His eyes caught a glimpse of his abdomen between his boxer and t-shirt, and he froze mid-motion. Morbid curiosity rose inside his veins. He tried to push it to the side, suppress it, but he failed. The feeling continued to nudge him more aggressively with each passing second while he couldn't tear his gaze from the unveiled tummy, still holding the blanket half over the teen. With a gulp, he made his decision. His hand gradually lowered the blanket, careful to not disturb his son's sleep. Shaky hands traveled toward the loose t-shirt, a finger slipping under the fabric to push it further. A flicker of chakra. The boy stilled. An ebony black swirl evolved slowly, ruling the pale skin in the faint light of the reading lamp. Minato only stared, his eyes wide, his mouth had long fallen open. Another shaky hand rose, his fingertips this time strolling over the pattern. It pulsed once, and it slowly started to fade. With a rush of adrenaline and desperation, Minato pushed another dose of his essence into the seal. And something unexpected happened. 1 second, he was there, leaning above his son, examining his seal, his own masterpiece, and the next moment, he blinked and opened his eyes to find himself staring into a yellowish void. The yellow flash took a step backward, his pools swinging from side to side to map his suddenly unfamiliar surroundings. There was a twitch in his chakra, a kind of sparkle. Minato suddenly stilled. Adrenaline rushed through his veins when something started to materialize in front of him. And he had frozen completely when a man took shape in front of him. Identical azure eyes bore into his own, one with shock, the other with an understanding soft glint. A long white coat framed a body over a jounin vest and the familiar navy blue shinobi pants and shirt. Untamable golden locks swayed in the soft breeze that ruffled his own in the same way. An exact copy of himself stood in front of him, doing nothing, only observing him with a small, understanding smile. "What the?" Minato finally mouthed faintly. "I think the question I would be looking for is, how?" The copy tried to joke, an awkward grin on his face. However, the grin faded into a serious expression that made Minato wince. "That's easy. Similar chakra resonates." The copy paused, waiting for the other to react, but when nothing came in response, he continued his explanation. "I had used up every bit of my remaining chakra by reforging Naruto's seal during Pain's invasion. I thought I was gone, this time forever. But it seems you had pushed enough of your own to reanimate me once more. Like a shock or something like that. You know, similar to CPR or something." The copy made a wandering face and shrugged. A long, stretched staring contest had begun that made even the copy start uneasily shifting from foot to foot. Finally, the tension broke. A small chuckle bubbled out from the younger Minato's lips, and with one more minute, it advanced into full-hearted laughter, his form shaking while tears escaped behind his eyelashes. He raised his hand to wipe them away as his snicker died down completely, but one or two small chuckles managed to come by from time, to the copy's annoyance. "Have you finished?" His only answer was another snicker, but this time, something tugged the replica's mouth upward into an identical, foxy grin. He is awesome, isn't he?" Minato nodded between two laughters and finally gathered himself. Wiping the last remains of his previous laughing session from his face, he straightened and turned. "Traveling through time, saving people from fate, turning the Kyuubi into his friend." The Hokage shook his head, a wide grin plastered on his face. "Making me meet a version of me from the future." He exhaled and shook his head once more, the smile slowly fading to swap places with a sour grimace. "But he still withholds things from us. So I hope I'll have my answers from you. I assume you can sense what's happening outside." His gaze hardened as he raised it to tear into his counterpart. "Who is the masked man?" His copy didn't answer, but Minato noticed his own motion when he was hesitating. Chewing his lower lip was his own custom habit. It went unnoticeable for almost everyone else, beside his closest friends, but now he could clearly see the annoying tick. Minato straightened and narrowed his now flaming eyes, his whole composure screaming authority. But it did no good with his mirror image. His eyes were calmly observing him, despite the familiar habit. "He wanted to protect you, you know," he whispered. "Just tell me, damn it! I can bear it!" Minato snapped, taking a step toward his replica. "I'm sure it's someone I know. Hell, I even considered Kakashi for a moment. Tell me, or I'm going to go crazy." The copy still hadn't said a word, so Minato tried another tactic. He tossed his authority to the side, his face softening this time. "Please! If you're me, you know I have to know. I have to save them. And for that, I need information." The copy, this time, did react by letting out a sigh and lowering his head slightly in defeat. Then in the next second, he collected his composure by running a hand through his hair. "Naruto still thinks he can save him." "Save who?" Minato asked, his eyes narrowing. "Toby." "Why? Why does he care for him?" Minato asked, his eyes narrowing even more. The copy paused for a second before his mouth turned up into a mischievous smile. "Do you know what an anagram is?" Yes, but what does that have to do with?" "Just think about it." The copy sent another cheeky grin before his eyes suddenly drifted to the side, his ears pricking a little. His form looked shakier with each moment. His grin faded into a soft smile as his form turned foggier. And tell Naruto that I'm proud of him beyond words. I'm proud of what he has achieved. Even if this piece is not as real as we think it is. With that final exhale, the echo of the person was gone just as fast as it came back to life. And this time forever. Kurama silently observed the exchange between the two blondes, giving them enough privacy but still keeping an eye, or more likely an ear, on their conversation. The fox narrowed his crimson eyes, and his ears twitched before the echo faded back to where it came from. He had felt the faint, almost insensible chakra that lingered inside the seal. But he had never thought about this possibility. His mind drifted back to the conversation, his eyes narrowing once more before tossing the ghost Minato's strange remark to the side. Minato shakily returned to reality. Blinking twice, he realized that he was still poking his son's bare belly. He immediately jerked his hand backward like it was hotter than the burning sun. Minato took a shaky step backward, his eyes darting around the room until they landed on something that disturbed his racing thoughts. The end of a familiar scroll was jutting out from under Naruto's pillow. Minato almost averted his gaze to finally leave the room when something else caught his attention. The edge of the scroll was rolled down a centimeter, obviously open. Minato's eyes immediately started to look over the room, his gaze suddenly filling with things he had until now disregarded. A bunch of photos were tidily placed under the bed lamp, secured with the shattered fabric of a second Hittite whose metal plates still shined under the piles of photos. The Hokage tossed his drumming shame to the side, grabbed the photos and sank down next to the bed, turning the bed lamp just a little to have more light. A small smile lurked on the edge of his mouth with the first photo. A team picture. 3 children in front of an adult Kakashi. The next one was another team picture. Naruto on the side, a short black-haired and almost unnaturally pale boy with a strangely forced empty smile, and Sakura in the middle. Flipping over the pile, there were more pictures like that. Pictures from shinobi all over the 5 nations. He spotted a girl from Iwa, a group photo from Suna, and even a guy from Kumo. He slowly put the pictures back the shelves, his gaze darting over the untidy room until he found another interesting thing. A thick, worn notebook with vibrant orange cover. Sloppy handwriting shouted its owner's identity. Minato furrowed his brow as his azure pools traced over Naruto's name once more. His childish and untidy handwriting had changed as his calligraphy skills excelled. He played with a shameful thought for a long minute. Stealing someone's diary sounded utterly childish. But still. Minato bit down on his lip, twisting the temptation once more over in his head. Yeah. Childish. He repeated in his mind. His eyes drifted once more toward the orange cover. Utterly childish. Minato shook his head and furrowed his brows. He'll tell me. He'll tell me once he thinks it is okay. His line of thoughts were disturbed by the bedsheet's soft ruffling. Naruto stilled, his until now peaceful expression twisting as he muttered. Sasuke. Don't. Minato peeked over his shoulder at his son, observing as his expression changed from time to time. From disappointment to rage to pain until it finally settled down into a deep, troubled frown. Bastard! He hissed this time. The Hokage glanced back at the notebook beside him. His mind drifted back some days ago, to the night of Naruto's confession. When he fled from the room to get away from Naruto's pleading blue eyes. He was so afraid back then. Afraid of himself, afraid of his own powerlessness. That he wouldn't be able to give the necessary reassurance to the son that he was pleading for. He was burying himself in the deep and dark pit of anxiety he himself dug. He had even lied to Naruto. He had gone home for a short time to stand next to Kushina's sleeping body, silently watching over her dream. Only to reassure himself that at least she was still there for him, that she hadn't disappeared during that roller coaster he suddenly found himself on. Minato went over Naruto's every small slip, his every failure. The night when he had introduced him to Kushina. The time when he had called him, Dad, awaking from his nightmare. The desperate way he clung on his clothes like a child would do to their. Minato drifted back to the memories he had witnessed an hour before. He must have been alone during his childhood. Because he was dead, because Kushina was dead. Kakashi? He played with the idea beforehand that if something happens to them, Kakashi would look over Naruto. But he was also a child, shattered in his soul. He was naive. Utterly naive. And Sarutobi? He had a village to look after. Jiraiya? Where the hell had Jiraiya been all these years? Minato violently shook his head. His teacher was a good shinobi, a good friend. He would definitely not abandon his child without something building in the background. At that time, his eyes drifted toward his wife's still form, wandering toward her round belly. He hesitantly reached out, resting his palm on the warm bulge, enjoying its rhythmical raise and fall until something poked his palm. Minato stiffened, not moving even a finger. Then again. There was that faint poke once more. His lips turned up into a soft smile at the third time. It was his son, knocking on life's door. His thoughts wandered back to the present, and Minato made his decision. Was it right? Was it bad? He didn't care, because he still knew nearly nothing about his son. His past. His future. Our future. He needed to know who was lurking behind that mask. With a fast motion, he snatched the book and strolled out of the room. Minato settled down to an armchair in the living room, his wife and son peacefully sleeping upstairs. The first beams of the rising sun would soon paint everything into the mixture of vibrant orange and girlish pink, but the Hokage disregarded it. So, too, did he toss his rising remorse to the side. He let out a calming exhale, defiantly glaring the still-closed orange cover in his lap. On a whim, Minato suddenly flipped it, letting it open at a random page, somewhere near the middle. His eyes drifted over the words with a small smile. It was a mix about a day's training schedule and a to-do list. Asking Kakashi-sensei about his stupid lighting jutsu, ask Pa for more kunai, taijutsu lesson with Hyuga Hayashi at 4. And the list went on with one or more stupid things included. His gaze stopped at a sentence. The notebook soon turned into a real diary on the next page. Regret. It was so obvious in his eyes now that I think back. He did regret all those things he did to the whole ninja world. Toby. He was ashamed of himself. Not like Madara. I could have saved him. I know. If I had the opportunity, I would have been able to save him. Toby. He repeated the name in his mind continuously, rolling it over and over for long minutes until he almost went crazy over it. Toby. He whispered into the room and shook his head. An anagram. Toby. Toib. Ibot. White. Odib. White. Obit. Minato suddenly froze, and so did his body. His eyes widened, the air in his lungs coming to a halt, and his heart skipped a beat. Obit. He whispered. Obit-o.